The news of my grandmother's death had arrived 3 days after we buried her. A crisp white envelope, bearing her familiar elegant handwriting, sat on my kitchen table. My name, Callum, was written in the careful loops and swirls I'd watched her perfect over countless Sunday afternoons in her garden. I was Cal, the family disappointment, the hawthorn who chose dirt and plants over our prestigious restaurant legacy. Now, I was the unexpected heir to my grandmother's estate, and my entire family had lost their minds. I stood in Grandma Mabel's garden, her letter trembling in my hands as the evening sun cast long shadows across her prized rose bushes. The same roses she'd taught me to tend when I was just a kid with scraped knees and too many questions. "You can't be serious," my brother Jackson's voice crackled through my phone speaker. "The house, the whole property? What about the restaurant?" "The letter's pretty clear," I said, scanning the words again. "She left everything to me, Jax. The house, the garden, even her savings. This is Cal, and you know it." His voice had that edge to it, the one that always preceded an explosion. "Dad's already talking to lawyers. You need to do the right thing here." I watched a monarch butterfly land on one of Mabel's white roses. The right thing according to who? Dad? You? According to the family, the property could save the restaurant. "We're struggling, Cal. You know this." The butterfly took flight, and I followed its path until it disappeared over the garden wall. "Maybe if you and Dad hadn't sunk all that money into that ridiculous expansion." "Don't, Jackson," I cut him off. "Don't you dare criticize what you abandoned. Some of us stuck around to carry on the family legacy." I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Funny how the only legacy that matters is the one you chose, Cal." A new voice joined the conversation. "Bianca, Jackson's fiancée," her tone honey-sweet. "Be reasonable. Your grandmother wouldn't have wanted to cause all this drama. She loved the restaurant too, didn't she?" "Did she?" I walked over to the greenhouse, where Mabel and I had spent countless hours. According to this letter, she'd wanted me to have everything, specifically to prevent it from being sold to save the restaurant. The silence on the other end was deafening. "Listen," Bianca's voice turned honey-sweet again. "Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? We can discuss this as a family. Your mother's making your favorite pasta." I touched the greenhouse door, remembering how Mabel would always say, "Trust the garden, Cal. It never lies, unlike people." "Thanks, but I have plans." I didn't, but they didn't need to know that. I needed to start sorting through Grandma's things. "Cal," Jackson started, but I ended the call. Inside the greenhouse, everything was exactly as Mabel had left it. Her gardening gloves were still draped over her favorite wooden chair, her tools arranged with military precision on the workbench. I unfolded her letter again, reading the last paragraph that had set this whole mess in motion. "My dearest Cal, I know this decision won't be popular, but you're the only one who truly understands what I've built here. This garden isn't just plants and soil, it's a testament to choosing your path, even when others can't understand it. Don't let them destroy it. And Cal, check behind the loose brick in the greenhouse's north wall. There's something else you need to see." I looked up at the north wall, where generations of ivy had made their home. Somewhere behind those leaves was another piece of Mabel's puzzle, and something told me it would only add fuel to this family fire. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from my mother. "Your father is very disappointed. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I turned off my phone and started examining the wall. I needed to find whatever Mabel had hidden before anyone else did. One thing became crystal clear: this inheritance wasn't just about a house and garden. It was about to expose every crack in our family's carefully maintained facade. The doorbell chimed just as I was prying at the loose brick in the greenhouse. Of course, they wouldn't wait for an invitation. Through the glass walls, I could see my parents' silhouettes approaching. My mother's pearls caught the late afternoon light. I quickly smoothed my dirt-covered hands on my jeans and met them on the garden path. My father's disapproving gaze swept over my casual attire while my mother clutched her designer handbag like a shield. "Callum," my father said, using my full name, never a good sign. "We need to discuss the situation like adults." "I was just working in the greenhouse," I said, gesturing to my clothes. "Let me clean up." Playing in the dirt again, my mother's smile was tight. "Some things never change." We settled in Mabel's kitchen, where the ghost of countless Sunday dinners hung in the air. My mother immediately began straightening things, rearranging the fruit bowl as if its slightly askew position personally offended her. "The restaurant's in trouble, Cal," my father began, his voice carrying that familiar weight of expectation. "Real trouble. Your brother's been working himself to death trying to keep it afloat." "I heard about the expansion problems," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "The new location isn't performing well," my father snapped. "Don't pretend you care now. You walked away from all that responsibility years ago, left it all on Jackson's shoulders." My mother touched his arm. "Everett, please. We're here to talk solutions." She turned to me, her expression softening in that calculated way I knew too well. "Sweetheart, this house, it's just too much for one person. And the maintenance costs." "Alone I can manage," I said firmly. "Grandma Mabel taught me everything about maintaining the property." Yes," my father muttered. "All those hours wasted in that garden when you should have been learning the business." A memory surfaced, 16-year-old me, proudly showing my father the herb garden I'd planted for the restaurant's kitchen. His dismissive wave as he walked away, saying, "Real men don't play in the dirt." I pushed the memory aside. "The property's value could save everything," my mother pressed on. "The restaurant, our family's legacy." "What about Grandma's legacy?" I challenged. "This garden was her life's work. It's a hobby, Callum. The restaurant is our family's foundation." My phone buzzed. A text from Tessa. "Don't let them bulldoze you. Remember what Mabel always said about standing your ground." "I'm not selling," I said, standing up. "Grandma left this place to me for a reason." My father's face darkened. "You ungrateful." "Everett," my mother interrupted, her voice honey-sweet again. "Cal, darling, at least look at the offer we've prepared. It's very generous." She pulled out an envelope from her bag, sliding it across the kitchen table. I didn't touch it. "This isn't about money," I said. "This is about respecting Grandma's wishes." "Respect," my father's laugh was harsh. "Where was your respect when you abandoned your family obligations? When you left your brother to shoulder everything alone?" "I didn't abandon anything," I shot back. "I chose a different path." Grandma understood that. "Your grandmother," my mother hesitated, exchanging a look with my father. "She wasn't thinking clearly near the end. Perhaps if we could test the will." The words came out quiet but firm. "Excuse me," I said. "Get out. Both of you. And take your offer with you." My mother's face crumpled in that practiced way that used to make me cave instantly. "Cal, please." "Now." They left, my father's angry muttering mixing with my mother's theatrical sniffles as their car pulled away. I noticed something had fallen from my mother's bag, a small notebook I recognized as Grandma Mabel's garden journal. Flipping it open, I found recent entries I'd never seen before, including one dated just weeks before her death. The words made my blood run cold. "They're planning something. Must protect Cal, must hide the truth about." The rest of the page was torn out. I looked back toward the greenhouse, where the loose brick weighed whatever Mabel had hidden. I needed to find it fast because now I knew this wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. There was something else, something my family desperately wanted to keep buried. I was still trying to make sense of Mabel's torn journal entry when Tessa called. "You need to get down to the county clerk's office now." "What?" "Why?" "Because your brother and his fiancée just walked in with a stack of papers, and I overheard them talking about property transfers. Tessa worked as the legal secretary there. Something's not right, Cal." 20 minutes later, I was speedwalking through the courthouse's marble halls, my muddy boots leaving tracks on the polished floor. I rounded the corner just in time to see Bianca at the clerk's window, sliding documents across the counter with perfectly manicured hands. "I need to see those papers," I said, stepping up beside her. Bianca's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. "Cal, what a surprise. Family business, you know how it is." "Exactly, which is why I need to see what you're filing." The clerk, an older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked between us uncertainly. "Sir, those documents concern my grandmother's property. I'm the legal owner, actually." Jackson's voice came from behind me. "That's what we're here to correct." He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, but his jaw was set with determination. "The will was never properly executed. We have proof." Proof. I laughed. What proof? Grandma Mabel wasn't competent when she made those changes. Bianca said smoothly, we have medical documentation. The clerk frowned. I'll need to verify. Bianca produced another document with a flourish, signed by her doctor. I snatched the paper before anyone could stop me. The signature at the bottom made my stomach drop. Dr. James Rivers, Bianca's father. This is a fraud, I said, my voice shaking. Your father never treated Grandma. He consulted on her case, Bianca replied. And as a respected neurologist, his opinion carries weight. Mabel was sharp as a tack until the day she died, I snapped. Everyone knew that, didn't they? Or did you just see what you wanted to see? Jackson stepped closer. Face it, Cal, she wasn't thinking clearly when she cut everyone else out. She didn't cut anyone out. She made a choice, I said, my voice rising. A choice you manipulated her into making. Bianca's voice dripped with false sympathy. All those hours in the garden, playing the devoted grandson, while the rest of the family worked. Don't you dare. What's going on here? A new voice cut through the tension. Martin Chun, the family's longtime lawyer, stood in the doorway, briefcase in hand. Martin, Jackson started. We were just filing fraudulent documents, it appears. Martin stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. I was Mabel's attorney for 30 years. I supervised the execution of her will, which was witnessed by 2 independent parties. She was completely competent. Bianca's smile finally cracked. This isn't your concern. It is, Martin turned to the clerk. Please note that any attempts to transfer this property without proper authority could constitute legal fraud. I'll be filing an injunction immediately. The clerk quickly gathered the papers, stamping them with a large red, suspended mark. Jackson grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. You're destroying this family. I looked at his hand, then into his eyes. No, Jax, you're doing that all on your own. Back in Mabel's garden, I finally found the loose brick and the envelope hidden behind it. Inside was a USB drive and another note. The truth about the restaurant's finances. Keep this safe. They'll try anything to hide what happened to the money. My phone buzzed. A text from Bianca. This isn't over. You have no idea what you're up against. I looked at the USB drive in my hand, then at the garden where Mabel had taught me that growth sometimes requires cutting away the dead parts to save the whole. She'd known this was coming. She'd prepared for it. Game on, I whispered, pocketing the drive. Because now I understood, this wasn't just about saving her garden anymore. This was about exposing whatever rot had taken root in my family's foundation, no matter the cost. I started toward the house, already planning my next move. Behind me, storm clouds gathered over the garden, promising rain. Perfect weather for unearthing buried secrets. The email from Evergreen Landscapes arrived while I was reviewing the files on the USB drive. A job offer, not just any job, but the kind that could define a career, lead designer for their West Coast division, complete with a 6-figure salary and creative control over major projects. The catch? I'd have to move to Seattle, leave the garden, leave everything. I was still staring at the screen when Tessa showed up with coffee and a determined look in her eyes. You're brooding, she said, setting a cup beside me. I can smell it from the driveway. Look at this. I turned the laptop toward her, then gestured at the scattered financial documents surrounding it. And all this. The restaurant's been hemorrhaging money for years, but not because of bad business. Tessa leaned in, scanning the numbers. Someone's been cooking the books. More like feeding them steroids. The expansion money, most of it disappeared into offshore accounts. I rubbed my eyes. Jackson's signature is all over these transfers, but the patterns, they're too sophisticated for him. Bianca, Tessa said quietly. She worked in corporate finance before getting engaged to Jackson. My phone buzzed. Another text from Martin Chun, meeting tomorrow. Bring the evidence. And Cal, watch your back. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Through the window, I spotted a sleek black car I didn't recognize. Mr. Hawthorne, a woman in a crisp suit, stood at the door, flanked by 2 men carrying briefcases. I'm Rebecca Walsh, representing Evergreen Landscapes. We were in the area and thought we'd discuss our offer in person. My stomach dropped. No one just happens to be in the area with a full legal team. This isn't a good time. She stepped forward. It's the perfect time, especially given your current family situation. The way she said it made my skin crawl. In the kitchen, Tessa was quickly gathering the scattered documents. How did you know about that? Rebecca smiled. We do our homework, Mr. Hawthorne. We also know about the attempted property transfer today. You're fighting a losing battle here. We're offering you an exit strategy. The garden can be maintained by professionals. We'll even include it in your contract, but you need to decide quickly. She checked her watch. Before things get messy, what does that mean? It means your brother's fiancé has friends in high places, the kind who can make fraud allegations stick regardless of the truth. The kind who can ensure you never work in this industry again. My hands clenched. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you protection and an opportunity. She placed her card on the counter. You have 24 hours. Choose wisely. After they left, Tessa found me in the greenhouse, aggressively pruning Mabel's roses. Cal, stop. You're butchering them. I looked down at the mangled stems. They knew about the property transfer attempt hours after it happened. How? Because this was never just about the garden. Tessa picked up one of the fallen roses. Think about it. The restaurant's money laundering, Bianca's connections, this sudden job offer. They're trying to get you out of the way. But why? What's so important about this property? Tessa's eyes widened as she looked past me. Cal, the zoning maps in Mabel's files, did you check them? I hadn't. We rushed back to the laptop, pulling up the documents. There it was, a proposed rezoning plan for the entire neighborhood, with Mabel's property at its center. Prime location for massive commercial development. This is what they're after, I whispered. The gens are just collateral damage. My phone buzzed again. Jackson, take the job offer, Cal. Please, while you still can. For the first time, I heard real fear in my brother's message. Whatever was happening, he was in deep. Maybe too deep. The rose in Tessa's hand had left a trail of petals on the floor, red drops like blood, marking a path. I had to choose, run towards safety or stay and fight, knowing it might cost me everything. Mabel's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes the hardest growth comes from standing your ground. I picked up Rebecca's card and slowly tore it in half. Call Martin, I told Tessa. Tell him to bring everything he has tomorrow. It's time to prune the family tree. Martin Chun's office felt too small for the weight of what we were discussing. The financial records from Mabel's USB drive were spread across his desk like a paper trail of betrayal, each document adding another layer to the conspiracy. They're planning to demolish the entire historic district, Martin said, adjusting his glasses. Your grandmother's property is the keystone. Without it, their development plans fall apart. And the restaurant? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A front. They've been laundering money through it for years. Your brother's signature is on everything, but Martin hesitated. But what? The patterns match other cases I've seen, cases involving the Rivers family's development company. My phone buzzed. A text from Jackson, need to talk alone. Please. I showed Martin the message. He shook his head. Don't go. It's too risky. But I was already standing. The restaurant was closed when I arrived, but the lights were on. Through the window, I could see Jackson sitting at the bar, looking older than his 34 years. You shouldn't have come, he said as I walked in. But I'm glad you did. Start talking. He poured 2 whiskeys, sliding one toward me. I never wanted any of this. The restaurant, the expansion, the development deals. It was all Dad and Bianca. I just wanted to make them proud. He laughed bitterly. To survive. You got out, Cal. You dared to walk away. I got trapped. So tell the truth. Help me stop them. I can't. His hands shook as he reached for his glass. Bianca's father, he doesn't just destroy businesses, Cal. He destroys lives. The front door chimed. Bianca walked in, followed by my father and 2 men I didn't recognize. Well, isn't this touching? Bianca's smile was sharp. The prodigal brothers reunited at last. You set me up, I said to Jackson. He couldn't meet my eyes. Nothing personal, one of the men said, moving to block the exit. Just business. My father stepped forward. Sign the papers, Cal. Transfer the property. We can all walk away from this. Walk away. I laughed. Like you walked away from Grandma Mabel when she refused to sell? The room went silent. Jackson's face drained of color. Careful, little brother, Bianca warned. Some accusations can't be taken back, like money laundering or fraud. I pulled out my phone, showing them the screen. Everything you just said is being recorded and live-streamed to Tessa. The bigger man started forward, but Bianca held up her hand. You're bluffing. Check your phones, I said. It should be hitting social media right about now. They all reached for their phones. In the chaos, I edged toward the door. You idiot, my father snarled. You'll destroy everything. No, I said. You did that yourself. I'm just pruning away the rot. I made it outside just as police sirens started wailing in the distance. Tessa was waiting in her car around the corner, engine running. Did you get it? I asked as I jumped in. She held up her phone, grinning. Every word. The police and FBI are on their way. Martin's meeting us at the station. As we drove away, I watched the restaurant shrink in the rearview mirror. The place that had imprisoned my brother and corrupted my family is now about to become a crime scene. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unknown number. Your grandmother would be proud. But this isn't over. M. I stared at the message, wondering if it was from Martin or someone else. Because despite everything we just exposed, something told me we'd only scratched the surface of what Mabel had discovered. You okay? Tessa asked. I thought about Jackson's haunted eyes, my father's rage, and Bianca's cold smile. About the garden waiting at home, where tomorrow I'd plant new seeds in soil enriched by everything that had died before. No, I said honestly, but I will be. The sirens grew louder behind us, their wail mixing with the night air, like justice finally breaking free of its chains. Sometimes I realized, revenge doesn't taste like victory. Sometimes it tastes like survival. The wedding invitation arrived exactly 1 month after my father's arrest. Cream-colored paper with gold embossing, like nothing was wrong, like our family hadn't just imploded in a scandal that made headlines across 3 states. You're not going, Tessa said, watching me turn the invitation over in my hand. We were sitting in Mabel's kitchen, where the morning light still couldn't chase away the shadows of recent events. Jackson posted bail for Dad, I said. Used everything he had left. That's not an answer. I traced the embossed letters. Despite everything, the fraud charges, the ongoing investigation, and the revelations about Mabel's death, Jackson and Bianca were moving forward with their wedding at the restaurant of all places. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your father, Cal, whatever you think he did, he doesn't deserve this. Another message followed. Jackson needs his brother there. Please don't make this harder. I laughed bitterly. Make this harder? They tried to frame me for fraud, threatened me with thugs, and possibly, I couldn't finish the sentence about Mabel. The investigation was still ongoing, but the evidence pointed to her death being far from natural. Which is exactly why you shouldn't go, Tessa insisted. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Martin Chun's car in the driveway. It's not good, he said as soon as I let him in. The Rivers family is pushing back hard. Their lawyers are trying to discredit the evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally. But the live stream. They're saying it was edited, manipulated. Martin looked exhausted. And Jackson, he's changed his statement. Says you set them up, that you're the one who orchestrated everything. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. Through the window, I could see Mabel's garden, where the roses she'd loved so much were beginning to wilt. Why would he do that? Because I had to. Jackson's voice came from the doorway. None of us had heard him come in. He looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. They have Mom, Cal. What? She's resting at Bianca's family estate. They're calling it a nervous breakdown, but he swallowed hard. I had to change my statement. I had to protect her. The pieces clicked into place. The wedding wasn't a celebration, it was a show of force, a message that the Rivers family was still in control. The invitation, I said slowly, it's a trap, isn't it? Jackson wouldn't meet my eyes. Just come to the wedding, Cal. Please. Make a speech, wish us well. Show everyone that the family drama was overblown. Maybe then. Maybe then what? Maybe then they let Mom go. They'll forget about destroying everything Mabel built. They'll let us live, Jackson whispered. After he left, I stood in the garden, surrounded by dying roses. Everything Mabel had created, everything she'd fought to protect, was slipping away. And now I had to choose between justice for her death and my mother's safety. There might be another way, Martin said, joining me outside. But it's risky, and you'd have to trust me completely. I looked at the wilting garden, remembering Mabel's words about growth requiring sacrifice, about how sometimes you had to cut away what you love to save what matters most. Whatever it takes, I said. My phone buzzed one final time, a message from Bianca, looking forward to having the whole family together again. Don't forget to wear black. It's a formal affair, after all. The threat wasn't even subtle anymore. We're black, like we're all attending a funeral. Maybe we were. I picked up a dead rose, its petals crumbling in my hand. Tell me the plan, Martin. And then help me find a suit, because sometimes to save what you love, you have to walk straight into the dragon's lair, even if you know you might not walk back out. Tessa touched my arm. Cal. I know, I said, watching the rose petals scatter in the wind. But Mabel taught me that every garden needs pruning sometimes, even if it means cutting all the way down to the roots. The restaurant gleamed like a funeral parlor, all black ties and forced smiles. I adjusted my dark suit, the same one I'd worn to Mabel's funeral, and walked into the lion's den. Bianca had transformed the place, replacing its warm family atmosphere with cold elegance. Black roses everywhere, their thorns prominently displayed. A message just for me. Cal, my mother's voice trembled as she approached, flanked by two of Bianca's cousins, men with hard eyes and concealed weapons. You came. Her hands shook as she reached for me, and I saw the faint bruising around her wrist. My blood boiled, but I kept my face neutral. Martin's plan required patience. Wouldn't miss it, I said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Where's the happy couple? Making an entrance, of course, Mayor Davidson appeared beside me, champagne in hand. Though I must say, I'm more interested in your work, Cal. That community garden project of yours has everyone talking. Bianca materialized before I could respond. Mayor Davidson, I'm so glad you could make it. Though perhaps we should discuss the development proposal rather than gardening, actually. The mayor said, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Seems there are some irregularities in the paperwork. A commotion near the entrance cut him off. Jackson burst in, his face ashen. The FBI. They're here. The doors flew open. Agents poured in, led by Martin Chun, not just a lawyer, but a federal investigator who'd been building this case for years. Nobody move, Martin's voice boomed. We have warrants for multiple arrests. Bianca's smile turned razor-sharp. This is a private event. Whatever you think you have. We have everything, I said quietly. The real estate fraud, the money laundering, the offshore accounts, and Mabel's autopsy results. Her composure cracked. You're bluffing. The garden soil, beyond the greenhouse, did you know Mabel tested it regularly? Kept records of every chemical change. I stepped closer, including the poison that showed up 3 days before she died. One of Bianca's cousins reached inside his jacket. 3 agents immediately drew weapons. It's over, Martin announced. Bianca Rivers, Everett Hawthorne, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and first-degree murder. My father, who'd been silent until now, lunged for me. You ungrateful. Jackson caught him, surprising everyone. Stop, Dad. Just stop. The mayor watched in shock as agents led Bianca away. My God. I had no idea. That's why they wanted the garden gone. I said, it held the evidence. Mabel knew what they were doing, so they killed her. But she'd already prepared her revenge. The inheritance, Jackson whispered. She left it to you, because I was the only one who would understand the garden's secrets. I touched one of the black roses. She taught me that every plant tells a story, if you know how to listen. As the chaos unfolded, my mother collapsed into my arms, finally free from her captors. I'm so sorry, Cal. We should have listened. Mrs. Hawthorne, Martin interrupted gently. We need your statement about your detention at the Rivers estate. I watched them lead my father away in handcuffs, saw Bianca's mask of sophistication crumble as agents read her rights. The restaurant, the source of so much family strife, would likely be seized as evidence. Jackson stood alone by the altar, his world imploding. What happens now? Now, I looked at the black roses, thinking of Mabel's garden waiting at home. Now we start over. Plant something new together. He sounded like the brother I'd once known, before ambition and greed poisoned everything. Maybe if you're willing to get your hands dirty. The mayor cleared his throat. Speaking of new growth, Cal, I'd love to discuss expanding your community garden project. The city could use more of your expertise. Outside, police lights painted the night in red and blue. Inside, among the wreckage of what was supposed to be a wedding, I felt Mabel's presence. She'd known it would end this way, not with a celebration of love, but with justice finally blooming through the cracks of our broken family. I loosened my black tie. Tomorrow, I'd plant white roses in the garden, but tonight, there was one more truth to unearth. 1 year later, I stood in Mabel's garden, my garden now, watching Jackson struggle with a particularly stubborn root. His prison pale skin was slowly gaining color under the summer sun. "You're doing it wrong," I said, kneeling beside him. "Here, like this." I demonstrated the proper angle, remembering Mabel teaching me the same lesson years ago. 3 months into his community service, and my brother was finally learning the difference between weeds and wildflowers. The judge had been surprisingly poetic in her sentencing, helped restore what his actions had helped destroy. The mayor called again, Tessa said, appearing with 3 glasses of lemonade. "The community garden network is ready to expand to the next district." I nodded, watching a monarch butterfly land on one of Mabel's white roses, the ones I'd replanted after the wedding that never was. The restaurant was gone now, converted into the city's first urban farming education center. Sometimes, karma has a green thumb. "Mom's therapy is going well," Jackson said quietly, accepting the lemonade. "She's talking about volunteering at the center, teaching kids about herbs and cooking." Our father's trial had broken something in her, but like the garden after winter, she was slowly coming back to life. Some plants need severe pruning to grow back stronger. "Found something else, too," Jackson added, pulling a weathered envelope from his pocket. "Behind the old restaurant's wine cellar wall during demolition. It's from Mabel." My hands trembled as I opened it. The paper was old, but the words were clear. "My dearest boys, if you're reading this, then everything has happened as I feared it might. But remember, even the hardest soil can nurture new growth if you're willing to work it together." "There's more," Jackson said, his voice thick. "Look at the date." The letter was written the day before she died. She'd known what was coming. Had planted the seeds of justice even in her final hours. "Cal," my mother's voice came from the garden path. She looked smaller now, humbler, but her eyes were clear. "The Heritage Rose Society called. They want to register Mabel's white hybrid officially. Did they say what they'll name it?" She smiled softly. "They're calling it Mabel's Truth."
Welcome back, viewers. Dear viewers, Retaliation Realm presents a new story. Well, I sighed. I'm finally free from that burden. Starting today, my parents were moving in with me. Or rather, their memory was. You see, when my parents passed away, my husband Adam demolished our family home. Standing in front of its empty lot, he blurted out, "Hurry up and bring the inheritance to our place." I stood there in shock. "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind?" At his words, I couldn't help but laugh. I realized what this was all about. "Why are you laughing? Don't you understand?" Adam and my in-laws looked at me, puzzled. That's when I told them the truth. My name is Amaya Smith. I was born the eldest daughter of ordinary office worker parents. I have one brother, and we were a very normal family. I married Adam when I was 30, and we had 2 kids. Balancing work and parenting, I suddenly found myself at 52. My son, Jeremy, and daughter, Lily, had grown up to be adults, each living independently and starting their careers. Now was the time to relax with my husband. It was an ordinary life, but I was happy. I thought I would continue to age like this, but my simple life changed one winter day. My father was in a car accident and suddenly passed away. He was only 68 at the time. Our whole family was overwhelmed with grief, especially my mother, who was so depressed she couldn't eat. "Mom, I know it's hard, but you have to eat," I told her repeatedly. "I know, but I just don't have the appetite. It feels like there's something stuck in my chest," she replied. My brother and I thought she was just emotionally distressed and watched her for a while. However, she rapidly lost weight in just 3 weeks. Worried, I took her to the hospital. The diagnosis from the doctor was shocking. Cancer. The cancer was advanced, and surgery wasn't an option. She had about a year left to live. I hadn't had the chance to take care of my parents yet. When I thought I had lost my father, now my mother was facing this illness. I was even more devastated than when my father passed, but I couldn't grieve forever. My brother lived far away and couldn't help, so it was up to me to care for my mother. I told Adam that I wanted to live with my mother. I couldn't leave her alone, both emotionally and physically, during her illness. Adam's reaction surprised me. "We just finished dealing with your dad's funeral, and now I have to be dragged into more of your family's issues," he said with a sigh, clearly annoyed. "You don't have to say it like that. Can't you just drive her to the hospital and back? Do we have to live with her?" I asked. "I think she might feel lonely. If it's not okay, maybe I can just live at my family home for a while," I suggested. Adam became indignant. "And who's going to take care of my meals while you're gone? I'll come and cook, of course. What about cleaning? Who's going to do the laundry?" he demanded. I fell silent. I intended to do what I could, but I couldn't do everything as before. Being confronted with this reality hurt. If someone said I was being selfish for wanting to care for my mother, I wouldn't be able to argue back. I'm sure my mother, being considerate, would say everything is fine as it is, but I wanted to do something for my parents. "Fine, but I'm not helping with anything, you hear?" Adam grudgingly said to my silence. His attitude was arrogant, but he had ultimately agreed. "I'm sorry, and thank you," I said. Although I thought he was being awful, he had agreed to my wish. I suppressed my desire to argue back and thanked him. Despite the troubles, Adam and I started living with my mother at my family home. We had originally been living in a house provided by Adam's employer. Adam was an only child, and since his father wanted us to live together, we didn't plan on buying our own home. We were going to eventually move in with Adam's parents. Living in the company housing was more convenient for work, and the rent was only about $1,000 a month, so it wasn't a big burden. But now that we've moved to my family home, we don't have to pay for that anymore, and we have more space. I think living together wasn't all bad for Adam. True to his word, Adam didn't help with anything, but I'm glad I could live with my mother. She seemed energetic, but she often felt weak and spent a lot of time lying down during the day. I prepared her meals, fed her, and managed her medication. It would have been impossible for her to do all that alone. "I'm sorry, Amaya. Thank you. It's a big help that you're here with me." "I should thank Adam, too," my mother said, expressing her gratitude many times. She was unaware of the harsh words Adam had said about living together, so she was grateful to him too. One evening, after my mother had gone to bed and Adam returned home, I brought up the subject of my mother's treatment while serving dinner. Adam glared at me and said, "I don't know what you want me to say. I told you I'm not helping with anything," refusing even to listen. I needed someone to vent to, someone to consult. All I wanted was for Adam to listen. Even after 2 months, and 3 months, Adam's attitude didn't change. He constantly complained about living together, acting as if he was doing a great favor, and his behavior became more obnoxious day by day. But I couldn't say anything against it. Between worrying about my mother and being considerate of Adam, I was becoming more stressed. Around the time of the 2-year prognosis, my mother's condition worsened rapidly, and she was hospitalized. 5 days later, she passed away. Although I had prepared myself mentally, I was devastated. My brother's family and my children came right away and helped a lot, but in times like this, you want your spouse by your side. However, Adam was laughing and chatting with his parents in a corner, not helping with the funeral preparations at all. My brother had taken the lead role in the preparations, and somehow we got everything ready for the funeral. But Adam, who should have been sitting in the family section, was at the very back of the relative section. "Adam, I want you to sit in the family section," I said. He replied, "No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative after all." "But you're my husband," I said. Then his mother chimed in, "He's your husband, but he's not your mother's son. Adam is our son, so he's an outsider, you know. Amaya should sit in the family section." Hearing this from my in-laws was painful. I was left speechless. Where I come from, it's common for sons-in-law to sit in the family section at funerals, though this might vary by area. With Adam not in the family section, distant relatives started whispering, wondering if we had divorced. It's one thing for people to gossip, but all this could have been avoided if Adam had just sat there. Feeling a bit upset that Adam wasn't by my side, we still managed to see my mother off peacefully. After the funeral, my brother's family, my children, Adam, and his parents returned to my family home. "Thank you for coming, especially at such a busy time," I said to my in-laws, offering them some tea. They laughed and replied, "Really, it's something. First, your father, now your mother. These funeral expenses are a burden for us too, but at least that's the end of it." I was stunned by their words. What do they mean by that? I couldn't believe they would say such a thing. I forced a smile and excused myself. Then I overheard Adam talking with his parents. "It must have been tough for you, Adam, living with outsiders." "Yeah, dealing with Amaya's whims was a pain. A husband shouldn't just follow his wife's demands. If you don't like something, you have every right to refuse," Adam said. I clenched my fists. Their voices, laughing and chatting, were unbearable. But this wasn't new. Adam's parents had always been insensitive and rude. When Adam and I got married, his mother said, "Couldn't you find someone more attractive? I can't expect much for grandchildren." His father joked, "They say beauty gets boring after 3 days. With Amaya, you won't get bored." And Adam just laughed. Reflecting, neither Adam nor his parents had said a single comforting word to me either at my father's funeral or after my mother's passing. Instead, they ridiculed me. I had felt sorry for imposing on Adam, but now I questioned his behavior as a person. I had been too concerned about Adam while just wanting to do right by my mother. I realized I shouldn't have felt so guilty towards Adam, especially since he wasn't supportive. Well, I simmered in anger. Adam and his parents continued to laugh and chat in another room. If my brother's family and my kids had heard them, they would have been upset, but fortunately, they were in the kitchen. I was relieved to be the only one who heard Adam and his parents' conversation. Then my mother-in-law spoke up. "Amaya," she called. "Yes," I replied, startled. "Can I have this?" she asked, holding my mother's purse. Confused, I stammered, "Oh well, your mother won't be needing it anymore, right?" Adam suggested I take it home. "Maybe I'll just keep it," she said, holding up the purse and inspecting it. I couldn't believe her audacity, especially right after the funeral. I took the purse from her and said firmly, "No, you can't." Her expression changed, not because of the purse, but because I, her daughter-in-law, stood up to her. Yet, I stood my ground. "We're not ready to sort through my mother's belongings yet. We'll distribute her keepsakes among the family later." My mother-in-law turned red with anger. "What do you mean? Are you saying I'm an outsider? You said earlier at the funeral that even Adam was an outsider to my mother. How come Adam is an outsider, but your family isn't?" I retorted. Hearing this, Adam and his father also turned red. "What are you saying? Apologize to Mom. How disrespectful of a daughter-in-law to talk like that." Their commotion drew everyone from the other room. I didn't expect to be called an outsider after all the effort we put into attending the funeral. "Let's go home, Dad," my mother-in-law shouted at me in front of everyone and stormed out of our house. For some reason, even Adam was angry and left with his parents. "What happened? Did you call your mother-in-law an outsider?" everyone asked me. Having heard only her side, taken out of context, it might have seemed like I was the one being harsh. But I explained the situation to everyone, and not a single person blamed me. Grandpa and Grandma should be more considerate of other people's feelings. That's just how Dad, Grandma, and Grandpa have always been. My children sided with me, but I still couldn't forgive those three. Adam hadn't come home for a while since that day, and I hadn't contacted him either. I didn't think I should be the one to apologize, and I wasn't sure if I could forgive him even if he did. But I knew things couldn't stay this way forever. Then one day, Adam came back. "Welcome home," I greeted him, suppressing the anger that flared up at the sight of him. "It's been tough, huh?" His gruff words were an attempt at showing concern, and I was taken aback. "Take the kids and go on a trip. It'll be a good change of scenery for you," he said, handing me travel vouchers. I was speechless. Instead, tears started to string down my face. It might have been the kids' idea, but I was touched that Adam went along with it. I immediately contacted the kids to plan the trip. "Really?" Dad suggested this. "It's surprising, isn't it?" The kids were astonished by my proposal. It seemed like it was a gift from Adam. "I wonder if Dad feels bad about what happened," I said, laughing. I gratefully accepted the travel vouchers from Adam. "I'll be off then." "Yeah, take your time. Stay with the kids at their places, too." "Why not?" "Really? I can't be away that long. Don't worry about me. I'll relax at my parents'. Just enjoy yourself." With that, Adam sent me off. Lily was happy to have me visit, so before the spa trip, I stopped by her place, and then Jeremy's. I hadn't been able to visit them while caring for my mother, so I helped out by cooking and freezing meals for them. "Mom, you should relax, but thanks. This helps," they both said, delighted to have my cooking at home. This opportunity was all thanks to Adam's suggestion. Then came the eagerly awaited spa trip. I spent a relaxing time at the hot springs with my children. The weariness from caregiving and the sorrow of losing my parents seemed to have healed quite a bit. I was away for almost a week, but both my kids returned to their homes with bright smiles. That was fun. "We should thank Dad for once." "True, just this once. But I wonder if he's up to something," Lily joked. "Don't say that. Dad thought about us in his way," I laughed. When I returned home, planning to share the memories with Adam and start our life anew as a couple, I was speechless. "What? The house is?" I looked around in disbelief. Despite recognizing the location, the family home that should have been there was gone. Then, out of nowhere, Adam appeared, followed by his parents. They were grinning at me, standing there dumbfounded. "Adam, what's going on?" I asked, trying to stay calm. With the same sickening smile, Adam said, "Finally, I'm rid of that baggage. Starting today, my parents are moving in with me at my house." "What are you talking about?" I replied, trying to stay calm. "Have you lost your mind? Your family home has been demolished. Bring the inheritance to our place quickly. Whatever you inherited, it's Adam's now." I realized then that the disappearance of the house was Adam's doing, and it was all for the inheritance. Such betrayal. After thinking about the future on my way home, I was filled with indescribable sadness and anger. But demolishing the house won't go Adam's way. I won't let it. I burst into laughter at the sight of their smirking faces. My laughter baffled Adam and his father. "Why are you laughing? What a weird woman. Has she gone crazy?" my mother-in-law said, looking at me as if I were eerie. Facing the three of them, I spoke up, "Don't you guys know what you're talking about? I haven't inherited a single penny, so there's no inheritance." After saying that, I burst into laughter again. They had mistakenly thought they'd become rich from the inheritance. Their wild imaginations and actions had me in uncontrollable laughter. "What do you mean? Explain yourself," Adam demanded, but I kept my mouth shut. I felt no need to enlighten them. Before that, I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to live together, go ahead alone. Ignoring Adam's question and rejecting his suggestion made my mother-in-law furious. "You helped with your parents' housework, but you can't do ours? You're aware of the circumstances, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I?" she yelled. "I told you I didn't want to live together. Have you forgotten? You chose to live together to avoid housework." I refuted them one after another. Also, demolishing the family home like that. There are things you just shouldn't do. I yelled at them and then left. Behind me, Adam's voice called out, "Where are you going?" But I didn't look back. Right now, I needed to find a place to sleep for the night, and I didn't want to see Adam's face. I immediately consulted a lawyer. Demolishing a house couldn't be that easy. The house was still in my mother's name. As I wondered which company had done it, an unbelievable truth came to light. Adam and his father had demolished it themselves. His father, who worked in demolition, enlisted the help of acquaintances and even rented heavy machinery. The planning was meticulous. Moreover, they even gave me travel vouchers to get rid of me. Tears welled up in my eyes at the realization of being deceived. The frustration was unbearable. Is there any way to punish all three of them? I tearfully explained my situation. The lawyer smiled at me kindly. Adam unlawfully demolished the house in your mother's name. He could be charged with property destruction and held liable for damages. Let's start by demanding a formal apology from Adam and his parents. I nodded in agreement, and the lawyer quickly took the necessary actions. A few days later, Adam called me, furious about the legal notice he received. "What's with this certified letter?" he yelled. "Oh, you got it? You destroyed my precious house, so of course you have to compensate," I replied. "Compensate?" "We said we were moving to my parents' place. I demolished a house that nobody was going to live in. You should be thanking me, not asking for compensation. Now bring the inheritance and come back home," he said arrogantly. "Thank you for demolishing my house. Don't make me laugh. And what inheritance? It's not even settled yet," I shouted back. Adam was silent, seemingly taken aback by my anger, which I rarely displayed. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was exactly this. I had a whole year with my mother. It was obvious that we would discuss matters of inheritance, so I told my brother I didn't want anything and to give it all to him. As a result, he inherited all the cash and stocks. He insisted that I should have the house since he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could be rented out. That was the plan. Either you and your father restore the house to its original state or pay the amount specified in the letter. I was considering settling this amicably. "Well, fine, if you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue you," I declared. "I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd get so angry," Adam said, starting to make excuses. "Of course I'm angry. What do you expect?" I snapped. Adam seemed to think that if my family home was gone, he wouldn't have to live with his parents. His father had always wanted to live together and had a fondness for Jeremy. Adam had refused to live together before, citing difficult commutes, but his parents thought I was the one against it. So he convinced them by demolishing my house and making it seem like I'd move in with them with the inheritance. But I couldn't forgive him after hearing such a thing. "Please, give me a break. I didn't mean any harm. Dad's sorry too. If he's truly sorry, then agree to the settlement," I said and hung up the phone. Adam kept calling and sending messages, apologizing. "If you're sorry, just transfer the money," I pushed him away. I knew my childhood home couldn't be restored, but this was the only way I could deal with my unbearable feelings. I stayed at Lily's place. My brother's family and my children knew about the situation. Although my brother must have been angry about our house being demolished without his consent, he said, "I won't interfere, but I'll help in any way I can. Do what you think is best, Amaya." Everyone condemned Adam's actions and supported me. A month passed without any compensation or payment from Adam. During that time, there was no contact with him. I couldn't stay with Lily forever. I wanted to get the money as soon as possible to at least establish a living foundation. Contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It was revealed by Lily. "This apron looks a lot like Grandma's," she said, showing me her smartphone screen. I was surprised when I saw it. It was a listing on a flea market app. The apron Lily mentioned, similar to my mother's, was a unique one I had made for her. "What? This is Grandma's apron. I made it, so I'm sure," I said. Lily quickly checked other listings. The sellers seemed to have recently joined the app with no transactions or reviews yet. There were nearly 50 items listed, and to my horror, all of them belonged to my mother. I immediately realized it was Adam. He was the only one who could have taken my mother's belongings after demolishing the house. I called Adam right away. "What's this about the app?" I asked. "App?" Adam responded, sounding annoyed. "Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's things without permission, aren't you? Cancel those listings right now." I demanded. Adam, sounding panicked, replied, "What? No, it wasn't me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over right now to get everything back," I said and hung up. Then I immediately headed to Adam's parents' house with Lily. "Where are Mom's things?" I demanded as soon as we arrived, confronting Adam at the door. "I don't know anything about it," he stuttered. "Tell the truth, Dad." Lily joined me in pressuring Adam. He seemed flustered. Adam's parents noticed our presence and came out. "Oh, Lily, you're here," Adam's mom greeted, smiling at the sight of her granddaughter. Angry, Lily said, "Grandma, tell Dad to tell the truth." "The truth?" "Grandma's belongings that passed away recently. Dad seems to be selling them." At Lily's words, Adam's mom burst into laughter. Adam, with a troubled look, kept repeating, "It wasn't me." Then his mother loudly exclaimed, "Adam is selling them? That's impossible. I am the one selling them." I felt my blood run cold. Adam probably knew about it. With a look that almost said, "This is bad," he turned to his mother. Despite Lily's shock, his mother cheerfully continued, "What? It's a lot of work, you know. I have to pack everything carefully and make sure the photos look good." She seemed oblivious to the fact that she was selling stolen goods, chatting happily about the app. I struggled to restrain myself from lunging at her. "Cancel the listings. Those aren't yours to sell." Lily, red with anger and tears in her eyes, pleaded with her grandmother. However, Adam's mother seemed displeased. "What's the big deal? I finally found a hobby I enjoy. Using the things I can and selling the rest for a little pocket money. It's good for preventing dementia. I'm the only grandma left, so Lily wants me to stay healthy and live long, right?" she said nonchalantly. Pleading with her had no effect. There was no sign of remorse. If talking won't help, then action is the only option. "Lily, let's go." "But, it's okay. Let's go," I insisted, pulling Lily out of the house and heading straight to the police station. I wasn't planning to file a report for the demolition of the house, but the theft was a different story. When I explained to the police that my mother's belongings were being stolen and sold, they acted immediately, and Adam's mother's account on the flea market app was suspended. The items wouldn't be sold anymore. I called Adam on the way back from the station. "I had your mother's account stopped. You knew about it, right? You're complicit." "No. I filed a police report about this. Please cooperate with the investigation." Adam became frantic. "What? We're family, right? Withdraw it, please." "Family? You still haven't paid any compensation for the house or alimony, and there's no sign of remorse." Faced with my shouting, Adam was taken aback. Despite everything, I still had feelings for Adam, having lived with him for so long. Sighing, I said, "I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Return everything. And Adam, your father looked quite unwell. Has he seen a doctor?" "What? I'm not a monster, so just passing on that message," I said and hung up. Adam's father, whom I had just seen, was alarmingly thin and hadn't spoken much. His complexion was more than just pale. It was unnaturally dark. His ill health was obvious, but that family probably hadn't noticed. His wife was nonchalantly selling stolen items, and Adam only acted tough with me. They lacked any real concern for others. The next day, I received a call from Adam's father. Expecting it to be a thank you call, I answered and got the complete opposite reaction. "What do you mean by treating me like a sick person? Planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of the hassle? I need to protect Adam and my wife from you." "I'm not going to any hospital," he scolded. It was shocking to be reprimanded when I was just concerned. "Sorry for overstepping." I was just worried. Humph. I'm not frail or short-lived like your parents. Don't make a fool of me, he snapped. I was infuriated by his words. But a few days later, he felt unwell enough to visit the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Adam called me in a panic. Dad's got terminal cancer. What am I going to do? I just snorted. I don't know. What did he say when I suggested going to the hospital? He said, I'm not frail or short-lived like your parents, so deal with it yourself. How can you be so heartless, Amaya? I never thought you'd be such a person. Did you ever say a single warm word when my mother was sick? Reflect on your actions. I said and hung up. As expected, Adam's father passed away soon after. As a human being, I didn't want to harbor negative feelings towards the deceased, but recalling everything that had been done and said, I couldn't shed a tear. After his funeral, his will was found. Despite all this talk of not being short-lived, he had made thorough preparations. The house goes to Jeremy. The rest of the estate is to be divided between my wife and eldest son. I was surprised to see Jeremy's name. Adam's father had always favored him, wanting to live with him. He must have wanted Jeremy to have the house even after his death. It was news for Jeremy. Renounce the inheritance. You don't need that house, do you? I told Jeremy, but he was happy to receive it. Inheriting the house was more of a burden than a benefit due to inheritance tax, but if he was pleased, I had no right to say anything. Following the will, Jeremy inherited the house. His grandmother was happy and paid the inheritance tax. He's our successor after all, she said. Well, that's not wrong. I felt a bit sad as if Jeremy had been taken from me. Then something unbelievable happened next. Come over to our house. Adam's call prompted me to head straight to his parents' house. When I arrived, I saw Adam's mother and Adam himself standing in front of their house, stunned, just like I once had been. The site was filled with heavy machinery and trucks labeled with demolition company names. Workers were tearing down their houses right before our eyes. What's going on? It's my house. I can do what I want with it, Jeremy said, appearing from somewhere, looking satisfied as he watched the demolition. Jeremy, what are you doing? Stop this right now, Adam shouted. Stopping it now won't make it livable anyway, Jeremy replied. What have you done? Adam's mother and Adam were begging Jeremy, but Jeremy just laughed. Did you forget what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Grandma, you were awful to Mom, too, right? Did you apologize? Jeremy's smile turned into a sharp glare at Adam's mother and Adam. They fell to their knees as the heavy machinery continued to noisily dismantle their house. I finally felt relieved, seeing the scene. Later, Adam finally paid the damages and compensation from the inherited assets. The stolen items that Adam's mother took from my mother were retrieved by Jeremy and safely returned to me. You always have me and Lily, Jeremy said, and I finally shed tears of relief. Adam's mother and Adam, having lost their house and left with no money, were now living in a company house. Adam and I had moved out of the company house, but now Adam and his mother had to return, becoming the subject of rumors. I explained the whole truth to Adam's colleague's wife, who we were on good terms with. Adam and his mother will likely have a hard life in the company housing, but it's their own doing. After Adam's retirement, they'll be forced to save up for a new place to live. I sometimes think about asking my friend how Adam and his mother are living now, just to have something to talk about. After that, I continued to stay at Lily's house. Then Jeremy got engaged to be married. He was planning to build a house. The land of the former family home sold for a decent amount, and I was glad to see that even that house served a purpose. Mom, come live with us, Jeremy offered. His fiancée welcomed me warmly. Since I couldn't keep relying on Lily, who lived alone indefinitely, I decided to take Jeremy up on his offer. I am thinking of living happily with my new family, determined not to become a mother-in-law like my own mother-in-law. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. We'll see you on the Retaliation Realm channel.
I always longed for the simplicity of an ordinary family. Growing up in foster care, I was familiar with the feeling of being alone in the world. I had foster parents as a child, but no blood ties. What I truly yearned for was a family of my own, the perfect family with a loving husband, adorable children, and me. So when a kind-hearted man proposed to me, I was overjoyed. With this man, I thought I could finally build that ordinary family I'd always dreamed of. However, in believing so, I was the world's biggest fool. My husband, George, callously ordered me around after I came home from a long day at work. "Hannah, make dinner now. Mom and Emily are starving," he'd say barely 2 seconds after I walked in the door. George, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, none of them ever thought of cooking. My name is Hannah, and I found myself stuck with this terrible family. At 29, I worked for a large corporation where George was also employed. We met at the same company. George was 30 years old, but since he couldn't get into college right after graduating high school, we ended up graduating college at the same time. First of all, it's important to mention that George was currently unemployed. He had a dispute with his boss in the sales department and quit his job. George was angry, claiming his boss was cold-hearted, but I knew otherwise. Even though George and I were married, we worked in different departments of the same company. I worked in the general affairs department, handling office work. My dedication and hard work were trusted and respected by my colleagues. During this time, the sales department manager, where George worked, came to me for advice. Nervously, I asked him what the matter was. He tiredly opened his mouth and explained that George had suddenly handed in his resignation that day. Shocked and confused, I had no idea this was happening. The manager explained the situation to me. George would casually leave work, even if his tasks weren't finished, and he'd dump his overtime work on his colleagues. When confronted, he would lash out in anger, claiming that we shared housework since we both worked. He also insisted on leaving work on time, citing concerns for his mother and sister's well-being. Feeling guilty and embarrassed, I apologized profusely to the manager. However, he reassured me that it wasn't my fault. He expressed his disgust for George, who quit his job without consulting me, his wife. George believed he would quickly find a new job, but the reality was harsh. Despite his efforts in job hunting, he faced rejection after rejection. He resented his previous boss, convinced that he had sabotaged his chances with other companies. I can swear that my company does not engage in such practices. Even after submitting a resignation, it's common knowledge among working people to stay in the company for at least a month. There are matters like work handover and procedures to be dealt with. However, George slammed his resignation letter onto the manager's desk and went home the same day. It was obvious to me that such an unreasonable person would not be hired by any company. George was content with giving his small severance pay to his mother and sister. He was raised in a single-parent family with his mother and sister Emily. Their father divorced his mother and left, which seems to have been a wise decision. Both my mother-in-law and Emily are healthy and capable of working, but they do nothing. I pay for living expenses and do all the work. Whenever I asked George to help out at home, he yelled at me, saying, "My mother and Emily are my precious family, girl. You should be devoted to helping us out." It made no sense to me, so I snapped back at him. "Forget about your mother, but Emily is 23 years old. At least let her get a part-time job." George adored Emily a lot, who was 7 years younger than him. Emily was also taking advantage of George's kindness, pleading for pocket money. As I firmly refused to give her money, George started working part-time. It was a job managing a warehouse for a courier service. George told people around him that he quit his job at a major corporation because his family was sick. He is a man who lies as he breathes just to keep his reputation. And so, George's part-time earnings became Emily's dating expenses. Not doing any housework or work, Emily started going out with men. I was fed up with my mother-in-law stealing bills from my wallet out of her grief for money. Even if I talked to George about it, he would get mad at me, saying, "Take care of my mom if you're my wife." This is why I can't stand people who grew up all alone in foster care like you. My mother-in-law scoffed at me, calling me wicked. I was living my days with the worst family. But one day, an encounter that changed my depressing daily life arrived. When I came home after buying groceries after work, there were unfamiliar shoes at the entrance. Large-sized men's sneakers. I thought we had a guest over since the shoes were larger than George's. Then a young man popped out. He was tall, had a handsome face, and his hair was light brown. When I thought Emily had brought her boyfriend, the man apologized, saying, "I'm sorry. I was in the words of dating Emily, but I'll take it back." Contrary to his frivolous appearance, his tone was polite, a wise young man making sound judgments. I spontaneously asked the young man who was about to leave with his sneakers on, "What's your name?" "I'm Emily's sister-in-law, Hannah," I introduced myself. The young man looked up and smiled a little. He looked like a player, but he had a smart expression. After he finished putting on his sneakers, he introduced himself. "I'm James. I work as a bartender." According to him, Emily confessed to him, and he was about to accept, but he declined. The reason was that Emily showed her true nature and spilled everything because of alcohol. "All my money is from George's part-time job. My sister-in-law is stingy and ugly. She makes me work and do housework." James deeply regretted that he was inexperienced and couldn't spot a good woman because of that. But he's a kind-hearted person who couldn't leave drunk Emily alone and sent her home. Moreover, James paid for the taxi fare. Just at such times, both George and my mother-in-law were not at home. So James got our house key from Emily, who was wasted, and carried her to our living room. I couldn't just leave her at the entrance. "I swear I didn't steal anything, ma'am," he pleaded. He seemed to be studying at a vocational school during the day and working as an apprentice bartender at night. Emily had called him out after school, claiming to work at a clothing store. James didn't see through Emily's lies until the last moment. Despite his flashy light brown hair, he was a serious and sincere young man. His natural hair color, a mix, matched the flashy appearance. "This is the business card for the bar I work at. Sorry for the trouble. He's running late, but he said he's ready to work now," he explained. "Thank you for bringing Emily home." "Have a great shift," I replied, smiling as James left. Normally, I would report a young man who was at home without permission and had a connection with Emily. But I intuitively thought that James was a trustworthy person with good nature. It was a silver lining that he hadn't been deceived by Emily. When I entered the living room, Emily was indeed drunk and asleep. Annoyance aside, to avoid dealing with a potential cold, I covered her with a blanket. Suddenly, Emily woke up and opened her mouth, unable to pronounce her words exactly. "Hey, where's James?" "My boyfriend with the brown hair, so handsome," she mumbled, checking her phone. James had verbally told her he couldn't date her, but it was in vain. Emily was too drunk to understand James's intentions. Cleverly, James had politely declined through a text. Emily had no recollection of revealing her true nature. She cried and grew angry, feeling like James had abandoned her. "What's wrong with me? I've been deceived," Emily wailed, oblivious to her own deception. Ignoring the commotion, I started cooking dinner. When George and my mother-in-law came home and heard Emily's side of the story, George became furious. "Did he mess with you, Emily? Where does he work? I'll punch him for you. We're going to demand damages." Indeed, poor Emily was foolish and pitiful, completely due to her own resentment. As I worried about causing trouble for James, Emily glared at me. "Anna, did you say something to James?" she demanded, showing me the text on her phone. The message read, "I can't date a liar." Emily had drunkenly revealed everything but thought I was the one who tattled. George and my mother-in-law also confronted me. So I explained the truth of my encounter with James at the entrance. He was trying to take care of Emily and was about to leave the house when we ran into each other. "That's all," I asserted, making it clear that I hadn't said anything unnecessary to him. George clicked his tongue and turned his face away from me. "Emily, let's eat sushi today. It's premium sushi," he declared, deciding to order sushi delivery on his own and indulging with my mother-in-law and Emily, all on my tab, without touching any of the dinner. As I sat alone, eating the dinner I had prepared, the laughter of the three of them echoed through the house. Eating sushi as a family is the best. It makes up for the usual terrible cooking, George remarked between bites. Really, it's so delicious it compensates for the usual bad food. My mother-in-law chimed in, joining the laughter. Agreeing with them, George laughed along, enduring their mockery. But amidst their joviality, I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Is this the family I had yearned for when I got married? How foolish I had been. Suddenly, the face of my only family member, with whom I had become estranged after marriage, floated in my mind. For some reason, I recalled James's kind smile and felt a pang of longing. Several days later, a turning point arrived while I was cleaning the house on my day off. George brought me a bank book. Seeing the deposit notification, panic surged within me. The bank book recorded the savings I had carefully accumulated before our marriage. With a triumphant look, George handed me the cash card. I'm giving the $100,000 you saved to my parents and sister. If you refuse, we divorce, he declared. This was the money I had been saving for our future child's expenses. I had hoped that having a child would change things, that George might distance himself from his mother and Emily. But George crushed those dreams, saying, I care about my mother and sister more than our kid. Do as you like. Realizing that building a happy and ordinary family with George was impossible, I showed him the divorce papers I had prepared. If you accept this, we're getting a divorce. It's over between us, I stated firmly. With joy, George filled in the necessary information on the divorce papers and handed them back. Ignoring his elation over the $100,000, I packed my bags and left the house, submitting the divorce papers, which got registered without a hitch. Returning to my adoptive father's house, I called him. Hannah, come back to your family home, he said. I, who had rebelled against my adoptive father since adolescence, felt tears welling up. Despite our strained relationship, my adoptive father forgave me, even though I had been ungrateful. Living quietly at home, memories from my childhood flooded back. I remembered being taken from the orphanage to my adoptive father's house. At that time, I had an adoptive mother who loved me as if I were her own daughter, but she passed away from illness. During my junior high school days, I began rebelling against my adoptive father. His frequent absences due to work left me feeling lonely. But upon reflection, I realized that both my adoptive father and late adoptive mother had cared for me deeply. Fixated on the idea of a normal family, I had overlooked the love of those closest to me. Now divorced, I felt a huge burden lifted off my shoulders. With this weight off, I threw myself into my work. It was during this time that I ran into James again. As I was leaving work one day, I bumped into the sales department manager in the elevator hall. Good job today. I greeted him, to which he kindly responded, You've been through a lot. You look better than before, and I'm so happy for you. He sincerely praised me for holding up well after my divorce. As I bowed and entered the elevator, the manager's tone turned serious. There's a bar that's been talked about in the sales department, he mentioned. I want to go, but it's a bit too fancy for an old man like me. Despite being married with children in high school, he expressed curiosity about the place. What kind of place is it? A cafe or something? He wondered aloud. He then humbly asked me to accompany him. Knowing the manager's sincerity, I agreed to accompany him to the bar. The bar, recommended by the manager's colleagues, turned out to be a hidden gem in the basement. Don't be nervous, the manager reassured me as he opened the door to the shop. Inside, the decor was chic, appealing to younger crowds. But what shocked me was when I looked at the bar counter and saw James, the bartender I had encountered before my divorce. He seemed a bit surprised but quickly greeted me with a smile. Welcome, it's been a long time, Hannah, he said. The manager, noticing their interaction, raised his voice. Do you know each other? The women in my department have been talking about a very handsome man working here. He looks like an actor, he chuckled. James, however, downplayed it. Not at all. I'm just an apprentice bartender. What would you like to order? As I was not accustomed to bars, I let James recommend a drink for me. Meanwhile, the manager opted for a non-alcoholic cocktail. The atmosphere was serene and the clientele were refined. During our conversation, James mentioned that his father was the owner of the bar. Despite my initial rebellion and college pursuits, I found myself inspired by my father's line of work. As we sipped our drinks, I mentioned my recent divorce. The boss, unusually furious, commented, "That woman's ex-husband is outrageous." "I shouldn't have given him a retirement allowance," muttered the boss. "But did you get drunk on a non-alcoholic drink?" James prepared a mint soda, smiling at me as I forced a smile. He offered the Minnesota to the boss for free. The boss calmed down a bit and, while drinking Minnesota, asked, "Hey, mister, do you send drinks from other customers like in dramas?" James laughed cheerfully at the boss's serious question. "Ah, I've never done it. Urban legend, perhaps." Amidst the pleasant atmosphere at the bar, my phone suddenly rang. I was about to step outside, but James assured me it was okay to answer the call here. Upon confirming it was George, my ex-husband whom I had divorced, I was annoyed by the interruption of the fun gathering, but I answered due to the persistent calls. Before I could inquire about the purpose of the call, George complained loudly, "I can't withdraw money. Your balance is zero." Of course, that's after I transferred the deposit to another account. Would anyone keep a passbook with $100,000 deposit in a house where those three greedy people live? I retorted. The passbook George stole from me was a dummy. The real one was carefully hidden by me. That's how I still had the $100,000. When I informed him, George was dumbfounded. Meanwhile, my former mother-in-law and Emily were overseas, living luxuriously. They gambled, and as their funds started to run out, they attempted to dip into my $100,000. However, they couldn't withdraw the money and were distressed enough to call me. George threatened me to send all my assets immediately. I refused and handed over the dummy passbook obediently. I also relinquished the house in the property division, coldly declaring that I no longer knew anything about it. Meanwhile, James asked me to lend him my phone. In front of me and the boss, he ruthlessly demanded, "George, there is a tab of $3,000 for your sister's drinks. I'm sorry, but please pay." After saying only that, James returned my phone to me. "So work hard for your beloved mother and sister, big brother," I said as George cried for help. But I hung up the call. Apologizing for the fuss, James offered me a cocktail with a smile. "It's on me. An Andrew ginger ale for the boss. Let's toast to the refreshing turn of events. James, the boss." And I toasted to George's miserable fate. From then on, George truly fell into a hell of debt. When he was at a loss in a hotel overseas, a kind gentleman approached him. The gentleman, a precedent in finance, offered to lend him money if George was in trouble. George, not direly in need of money, jumped at it without considering the interest. As a result, his debt ballooned to $500,000, and he was in a crisis. The kind gentleman even prepared a job for him to repay the loan. Now, it seems George is working on a fishing boat, and nobody knows where he is. Emily and my mother-in-law had an obligation to repay. Working from morning till night except for sleeping, they sold their house and now live in a small apartment. I was going about my usual routine at my parents' home when, unusually, my foster father was also present. As we chatted, he remarked, "You're well prepared," pitching my ex-husband to the deep end, referring to the individual who lent money to George, effectively sending him into a financial trap. My foster father was a prominent figure in the financial industry, well-connected in various fields. George was on a family trip abroad with the proceeds from selling all of my jewelry, which he couldn't have afforded with just his part-time job salary. When I got married, my foster father had instructed me to safeguard two things: the jewelry and the house. "I'm always amazed at your audacity, Dad," I quipped. My foster father had connections with the precious metal buyer that George utilized. He knew that George, who sold my jewelry, was going overseas. "You show up just in time in front of George, and you see through everything," I remarked, astounded by his foresight. Laughing, he mentioned that he also knew about my rapport with the young bartender. I nearly spat out my tea. I chuckled. The manager took a liking to James, so he brought other colleagues along to the bar. That's when my boss asked James, Do you have someone you're interested in here? Be honest. Directed by my manager's leading question, James looked at me and confessed, I like you, Hannah. If you're okay with someone as inexperienced as me, let's get together. Stunned, I reminded him of our age difference and my divorce. But James persisted, expressing his feelings earnestly. In an unexpected turn of events, I found myself with a 23-year-old boyfriend. My manager was overjoyed, declaring himself my wingman. I intended to tell my foster father about James later, but he found out when I mentioned visiting James' bar. He's a very nice young man, my foster father remarked, contrasting him with George. My foster father had always been fiercely protective of me, and though he could be extreme, he was a kind father. I felt grateful to have him in my life. When I shared my plans to start a new family with James, he smiled and congratulated me. Next time, I plan to take a break and go to the hot springs with my dear foster father, with James joining us. I promised to marry James, and I could already envision a harmonious family dynamic between my father and James. With a smile, I reported my plans to my father, who returned the sentiment with warm congratulations. Congratulations, Hannah, he said, sealing the approval for my new journey ahead.
One day, something unexpected happened to me. It all began when I took my husband to the doctor for a regular checkup. We thought it would be just a normal visit, but it turned out to be a big shock. The doctor, Dr. Lawrence, looked very serious and told us some scary news about my husband's health. His serious face made it clear that this was serious. I felt really scared and couldn't believe what I was hearing. The person I loved and took care of was now causing me worry and fear. Dr. Lawrence told me I should think about my safety and maybe stay away from my husband for a while. His words made me feel overwhelmed and afraid. My name is Evelyn Frieden, and I'm 50 years old. I spent the last 10 years working at a big company that makes medicine. That place feels like a second home to me, giving me comfort and making me feel like I belong there. Even though I'm older, I've kept working full-time and earned the respect of my coworkers. Not many people my age still work full-time, but I've always been okay with it. Part of the reason I'm so dedicated to my job is that I didn't get married until 4 years ago. My boss, Winston, and I are close because we're both single. Once, he jokingly asked me if I was ever going to get married, but I knew he was just teasing. Around that time, I was seeing Daniel secretly. He's older than me, was married before, and like me, doesn't want kids. We met through a service that helps people find companionship later in life. We decided to keep our marriage quiet, not telling anyone about our plans, even though our boss made jokes about us getting married eventually. Daniel and I got married quietly, without any big ceremony, just signing papers at City Hall. It was simpler than I expected, but I was excited about our future together. However, when Dr. Lawrence gave me scary advice, I had to rethink everything. My feelings of care for my sick husband were now mixed with fear and confusion. Dr. Lawrence's words kept echoing in my head, telling me I needed to act to keep myself safe. As I stood there trying to understand what was happening, I realized I had to make a decision quickly. Suddenly, the life I knew and the plans I had were uncertain. I'm Evelyn, and my husband Daniel works at a factory. Honestly, I make more money than he does. Daniel started working at the factory right after high school. I grew up in an orphanage and always wanted to be independent. That's why I didn't want to quit my job at the pharmaceutical company even after we got married. I love my job too much. When Daniel and I got married, I told my boss Winston right away. He congratulated me, but I could tell he felt a little sad. Maybe he was lonely because his friend, who was also single, got married first. I tried joking with him about it, but he didn't seem to want to talk about it, so I dropped it. Even though Winston's reaction was a bit strange. I was really happy to start this new part of my life with Daniel. I imagined all the great things we would do together, but real life wasn't as exciting as my dreams. Being newlyweds was pretty normal. Not much changed for me. I kept working, and the biggest difference was moving to a quieter area and driving to work instead of taking the bus. Daniel and I shared my old car because he didn't have one. About a year after we got married, things started to go wrong. Daniel began acting differently. He didn't seem himself. He barely touched his breakfast, seemed lost in his thoughts, and even mixed up simple things like condiments. His clothes didn't match, and he became quieter both at work and at home. While I've always admired Daniel's quiet strength, his silence started to weigh heavily on me, making me feel like I was all alone. This feeling of loneliness grew as I noticed these small but important changes in him. It hit me that Daniel might be going through a mental health problem. Seeing someone you love struggle without knowing how to help them is tough. So, I decided to take Daniel to a special clinic that helps with both mental and physical health. There, he was diagnosed with depression. I knew a bit about depression, but hearing the official diagnosis made everything seem a bit darker. The doctor explained that the best way to deal with depression is to figure out what's causing it and tackle that directly. However, finding out what exactly was making Daniel depressed was hard. He had been working at the same factory for years without any problems, and nothing big had changed at his job. I even worried that maybe our marriage was somehow making him feel this way. As we talked with the doctor, I reassured him that Daniel and I were living a happy life together, and we couldn't pinpoint any specific problems at home that might have caused Daniel's depression. The doctor told us to come back if anything changed or if we figured out what might be causing his depression. But even after visiting the clinic multiple times, we couldn't find out why Daniel was feeling so down, and as time went on, his depression only got worse. On his worst days, he could hardly get out of bed, often had headaches, and sometimes had to call in sick to work. He lost his appetite and a noticeable amount of weight. Eventually, he had to quit his job because he couldn't keep up anymore. Daniel felt guilty for relying on me financially, but I assured him that I was okay with working. My main concern was his health. It was really hard to see him suffering so much, and I was always worried about him. Once, when I was at work, Daniel went out and got lost on his way back home. That made me worry even more because I wondered if he was not just dealing with depression but maybe even dementia. That thought added to my stress. When my coworker asked how things were going, I had to admit that Daniel wasn't getting better. It's tough to watch someone you love struggle so much without being able to help them. One day, Winston, my boss, noticed that I looked really tired and gave me an energy drink. It made me feel a little better, and I was touched by his kindness. He reminded me that we're all in this together, and his words almost made me cry. With everything going on with Daniel, I hadn't realized how much stress I was under. It became clear that I needed to take care of myself too, or else I might fall apart. So, I threw myself into my work, trying to keep things as normal as possible in our lives. A year had gone by, but things hadn't gotten any better for Daniel. If anything, they had gotten worse. As our third wedding anniversary approached, I couldn't see any improvement in his condition. Then one morning, I realized our car was missing. I checked again, but it was gone. Since Daniel's diagnosis, I was the only one who drove it, and I hadn't used it since the day before, so it should have been at home. I asked Daniel if he knew where the car might be. He said he thought it was there when he got home yesterday. I remembered he had gone out for a bit while I was at work. The doctor had suggested he try walking or jogging to help him cope. If the car was there when he came back, it must have disappeared during the night. With the car gone, I had to use public transport and ended up being about 10 minutes late for work. I explained the situation to Winston, my boss, who was understanding but curious about the car's disappearance. He wondered if Daniel might have taken it, but I didn't think so, given Daniel's condition and his reluctance to drive since getting sick. It didn't seem likely. Despite Daniel's memory lapses and mood swings, I couldn't imagine him being responsible for the missing car. The car mystery just added another layer of complication to our already tough situation. Right after realizing the car was gone, I reported it to the police, hoping it would turn up soon. But deep down, I worried that it might be gone for good. And if that wasn't enough, something else strange happened on payday. I went to the bank to withdraw some money and found that my account was empty. I was shocked. We had a joint account, which I checked next, only to find it was also empty. This left me completely puzzled. Daniel and I shared the joint account, but he didn't have access to my account, and he didn't know its PIN. Yet somehow, all our savings had disappeared. It hit me hard, and when I got home, I confronted Daniel about it. I asked Daniel if he knew anything about the money missing from our joint account. He seemed genuinely puzzled and said he didn't know anything about it. Because of his depression, I was hesitant to push him further, worried it might make things worse for him. Daniel was staring at the ceiling, looking distant like he often did. When Daniel was lost in his thoughts due to his condition, it made me wonder if he could have taken the money, but I wasn't sure. Planning to talk to the police about it, I felt overwhelmed by losing both our car and our savings. The financial strain was tough, especially since I didn't have a family to lean on for support. Growing up in an orphanage, I didn't have parents to help me out in tough times. With Daniel's condition not improving, it was suggested that we move to a bigger hospital with more resources than the small clinic we had been going to. The clinic had done what they could, but they thought a general hospital could give him better care. They even gave us a referral letter, so we decided to go to the general hospital. For the first time, taking a taxi was a bit nerve-wracking for me, and Daniel stayed quiet throughout the journey, lost in his thoughts. As we arrived at the hospital, I took a deep breath, preparing for whatever might come next. I walked into the hospital and handed over the referral letter at the reception, expecting to wait a while since it was a busy place. The lobby was full of patients, each waiting for their turn. After about an hour, Daniel was finally called in for his consultation. While he went inside, I took out a book to pass the time. But before Daniel had even settled into the doctor's office, a nurse came up to me. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Simmons?" she asked. I said yes, and she told me the doctor wanted to see me since I was used to discussing Daniel's condition. I followed the nurse to another room, feeling a bit anxious. There, I met a doctor who looked a bit older than me, with grey hair and a kind manner. Before I could even sit down properly, I asked if this was about Daniel's condition. He nodded seriously, and I braced myself for whatever news he had for me. The doctor's next words caught me completely off guard. He told me that Daniel had been arrested for fraud 10 years ago and advised me to keep my distance from him. I was utterly confused. Why was this coming up now during a routine medical visit? The doctor explained that he suspected Daniel might be faking his depression. He remembered treating a deep cut on Daniel's leg during surgery 10 years ago, which raised his doubts. This revelation shocked me. I thought we were dealing with Daniel's mental health, but now I was learning about his hidden past and a possible deception about his current condition. It was a lot to process, and I struggled to reconcile the caring husband I knew with the person the doctor described. When the doctor mentioned recognizing a large scar on Daniel's right leg, it all started to make sense. I knew of the scar but didn't know how Daniel got it, as he had never mentioned it. Finding out that the doctor before me was the one who had treated Daniel's injury years ago felt like an unbelievable twist of fate. As the doctor continued, he revealed more about Daniel's past. Daniel had injured himself during a dispute with his ex-wife, which stemmed from him stealing her money and luxury items. Shockingly, he had even pretended to have dementia to lower his ex-wife's guard before committing fraud. This pattern of faking illnesses to aid his deceit was truly disturbing. Learning about Daniel's criminal history and arrest was overwhelming. I hadn't looked into his background before marrying him. Having been alone for most of my life, I was just grateful to find someone who wanted to be with me. The doctor's serious warning that Daniel could be a danger to me sent shivers down my spine. His tone made it clear that this was a serious situation. It hit me hard. I had been deceived. In the days that followed, I struggled to act normal around Daniel while secretly planning my next moves. I decided to install surveillance cameras around our home to monitor Daniel's actions when I wasn't there. About a week later, I noticed a watch and bag were missing. When I reviewed the camera footage, I saw Daniel leaving the house with them and returning later with a lot of cash, looking pleased with himself. This footage confirmed my worst fears. Daniel was the one behind the theft of my belongings, the car, and our savings. Seeing hard evidence of his deceit was heartbreaking. Daniel had lied to me and manipulated me, betraying the trust one had in him. It was clear that I needed to take serious action against someone who had pretended to be vulnerable and in need of care, only to take advantage of my kindness and generosity. The realization that Daniel had betrayed my trust was unbearable. I had dedicated my life to working and caring for what I thought was a sick partner. The idea of getting a divorce seemed too small compared to the immense deception I had experienced. It was clear we needed to go our separate ways, but I wanted more than just a legal separation. I wanted Daniel to truly grasp the seriousness of his actions and to make amends for the harm he had caused. With a heavy heart and tears threatening to spill, I gathered the divorce papers and filled them out meticulously, including all the necessary details. The following day, pretending everything was normal, I told Daniel I needed to step out for a moment. I had already arranged to take a day off from work, explaining the urgency of my situation to my employer, who had agreed to my sudden absence. At the police station, I presented my case to the officers, showing them the footage I had captured of Daniel's deceit. At first, they were hesitant to take action based solely on the video. However, after checking with the pawnshop, with Daniel's criminal history revealed and the mounting evidence against him, the police quickly decided to act. They confirmed that he had sold the stolen items at a pawn shop and was attempting to sell my car. Suspicion also arose about his supposed depression, as he had illegally accessed my bank accounts. Feeling a mix of relief and sadness as the truth came out, I knew that taking legal action was necessary to protect myself and seek justice for the betrayal I had experienced. During a recent visit to the hospital, a doctor recognized Daniel from his past deceitful behavior, where he had once pretended to have dementia to deceive his ex-wife. This revelation made me question his current claims of depression even more. When we returned home with the officers in the early afternoon, Daniel looked surprised to see me and even more shocked by the police presence. Despite the divorce papers I held, his focus was on the officers as they informed him of his arrest for fraud. Daniel protested, trying to use his depression as a defense, but I wasn't fooled. At that moment, facing the consequences of his actions and the end of our marriage, Daniel's mask started to slip. Deciding to take legal action was tough, but it was necessary for my protection and to seek justice for the betrayal I had experienced. Daniel remained unfazed in front of the police, casually denying everything. It was almost as if his history of deceit had prepared him for this moment. He showed no signs of guilt or remorse, instead challenging us to provide proof of his fraudulent actions. His boldness was shocking, especially with the police ready to arrest him based on solid evidence. It was clear that he was accustomed to manipulating situations and underestimating their seriousness. He had deceived me, taking advantage of my trust to steal from me and exploit my kindness. Yet, in a twisted attempt to shift blame, Daniel suggested that it was my fault for being too trusting, which felt like another insult. His audacity was astounding. I had supported him, hoping for his recovery, only to be betrayed and treated with disdain. At that moment, I lost my patience. I declared my intention to seek legal advice and pursue alimony, urging Daniel to face the consequences of his actions. My outburst at the police station surprised everyone, including the officers, but it finally seemed to shake Daniel's composure. As the police handcuffed him, his defiance crumbled. He looked defeated, his arrogance replaced with frustration as he was led away. Watching the scene unfold, I felt detached, as if I were watching someone else's life unravel. Ever since the doctor's warning, nothing had seemed real anymore. Yet here, confronted with the harsh reality of my situation, determined to move forward from the chaos Daniel had caused, watching him being taken away by the police felt surreal, almost like a scene from a dream. This moment marked a turning point, allowing me to imagine a return to the life I had before the chaos of marriage consumed it. A sense of relief washed over me, knowing I wouldn't spend my future under Daniel's manipulative control. However, I also felt a wave of loneliness. After waiting more than 47 years to marry, the idea of being alone once again overshadowed my newfound freedom. 2 months later, Our divorce was finalized. Daniel's arrest had caused a slight delay in the process, but by the time everything was official, my emotions had settled. I was able to reflect on our shared history with a clear mind. Daniel's future was uncertain, facing imprisonment for his second offense. I could only hope that this experience would lead him to sincerely reconsider his choices. In the aftermath of our dissolved marriage, which had become nothing more than a disillusioning memory, I found myself contemplating my next steps over a simple lunch at work. It was then that my boss, Winston, approached me with his store-bought hot dog lunch and made a seemingly casual yet loaded comment. "I think you'd be just fine if you were with me," he said, almost offhandedly. His words caught me off guard, and it took a moment for their full weight to sink in, leaving me momentarily flustered. "Yes, I'm serious," he added, noticing my hesitation. His tone was smooth yet sincere. I was speechless, momentarily forgetting about my lunch, as I processed Winston's proposition. He then went back to work, leaving me to contemplate his unexpected offer. In the days that followed, the idea of a romantic relationship with Winston had never crossed my mind, yet I couldn't ignore the care and stability he had always shown me. His steady presence and responsible nature suddenly made me see him in a new light. Despite my initial reaction, as I continued to eat and ponder, the seeds of possibility that Winston had planted began to take root in my mind, suggesting a future I hadn't dared to imagine until now. The idea of inviting Winston out for a meal after work sparked warmth within me. It kindled a sense of hope for the future. Perhaps this was the perfect moment to embark on a new journey, to explore the possibility of happiness and companionship once again. The thought of stepping out of my comfort zone and into a new beginning with someone who had shown me kindness and support felt both thrilling and comforting. Tonight, I decided, could be the start of something new and beautiful. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. We'll see you on the Retaliation Realm channel.
Welcome to the Retaliation Realm channel. We hope you enjoy today's story. I'm Alara, and until my 30th birthday, the most exciting part of my life was when the accounting firm I worked for decided to switch from PC to Mac. Yeah, not exactly headline stuff. But then, at a friend's birthday bash, everything changed. That night, I stood in the corner of a cramped living room, clutching a soda and feeling awkward in my too-tight dress. The music was loud, way too loud for conversation, but apparently just right for him, Declan. He was a head taller than most, which was probably why he spotted me. He sauntered over with a confidence that made my heart skip. "Hey, you're Alara, right?" His voice was clear even over the thumping bass. Yeah. And you are?" I sipped my drink, trying to look calmer than I felt. "Declan. I've seen you around. Mind if I join you?" He didn't wait for an answer, just took it as a given and stood next to me. "Not at all," I said, my voice nearly lost to the latest pop hit blaring through the speakers. "So, Alara, what brings you here tonight?" He leaned in, his tone casual but his eyes intense. "Just here to celebrate Sarah's birthday." "You know her?" "I went to college with her. She keeps inviting me to these things," I shrugged. "Can't say no, can I?" "We work together. She's kind of hard to say no to, an accountant, right?" He nodded like he knew all along. "That's right. Numbers are my game," I joked, though I usually found nothing funny about spreadsheets. "Sounds thrilling," he grinned, and I couldn't tell if he was mocking me or not. "Oh, absolutely. It's all wild parties and high stakes in the accounting world." We laughed again, and that's when I felt it, the ease of talking to someone who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. It was a new and exciting feeling, yet a bit scary. "Do you want to grab some air?" he suggested, tilting his head towards the backyard. I nodded, grateful to escape the noise. Outside, the cool air was a relief. "So, what's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" I asked, trying to sound smoother than I felt. Just looking for a good time, I guess, and maybe someone cool to hang out with, he said with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. We talked about everything and nothing: movies, books we liked, how he was into graphic design but stuck at a corporate gig he didn't love. It was as if we had known each other for years. As the night wound down, he pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number?" "I'd really like to see you again, Alara," he said. I hesitated, not used to this kind of attention, but something about him felt right. "Sure," I said, punching my number into his phone. He smiled, his whole face lighting up. "Great. I'll call you. We should go out, just the two of us," he suggested. "Sounds good," I managed, my stomach doing flips. I watched him go, a part of me still in disbelief that this was my life now. Maybe turning 30 wasn't so bad after all. Maybe it was just the start of something truly great. The days after Declan's call felt like a blur. Before I knew it, I was getting ready for our first date. My nerves were all over the place. It wasn't like I had much experience in this department. I chose a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but hoped it did the trick. Declan picked me up at 7 sharp. His car was clean and well-kept, nothing flashy, but it suited him. As I got in, he flashed me a smile that could knock you sideways. "You look great, Alara," he said. "Thanks," I mumbled, my face probably as red as a tomato. "You look nice too." Dinner was at this cozy little Italian place he knew. The food smelled amazing, but my stomach was doing somersaults. We ordered pasta with some fancy sauce, and I opted for plain old marinara. "So, Alara, tell me something about you that no one else knows," he said, twirling his spaghetti expertly onto his fork. "Well, I'm pretty boring, but I guess not everyone knows I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute," I replied, playing with my food more than eating it. "Really? Now that's pretty cool. You'll have to show me sometime," he said, starting to relax a little. "What about you? Any hidden talents?" "I make a mean breakfast burrito," he boasted with a grin. "Best you'll ever have. I'll take your word for it." "Maybe you can prove it sometime," I teased. The conversation flowed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We saw each other constantly. Declan would come over after work, or we'd meet for lunch near his office. He introduced me to his favorite spots around town, little nooks I'd never noticed before. It was like seeing the city for the first time. Things took a serious turn when he invited me to meet his parents, Cyrus and Serena. They lived in a small but cozy house filled with photos and knickknacks. Serena hugged me the second we walked in. "Oh, we've heard so much about you, dear," she said, squeezing my shoulders. "Declan, she's lovely," Cyrus said, passing me the potatoes. "Thanks, Mom," Declan said, and I could tell he was pleased. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was non-stop. "So, Alara, Declan tells us you're an accountant." "That must be interesting," Cyrus said, passing me the potatoes again. "It has its moments," I replied. "Mostly just numbers, but I like the order of it." "And how's your family?" Serena asked, genuinely interested. "They're good, thanks. My dad's a businessman, always busy, but he's been really supportive of me." It was all happening fast, but it felt right. It was as if everything in my life had been leading up to this meeting. Declan made me feel like someone finally saw me for who I was, not just some plain Jane accountant. One evening, a few months into our whirlwind romance, we were walking along the riverbank, the city lights reflecting off the water in a pretty, postcard-like way. "Alara, I've been thinking," he started, stopping and facing me. "Yeah?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "I don't want to wait any longer. I know this is fast, but will you marry me?" Just like that, my world changed. No hesitation, no doubt, just a simple yes, "Declan, I'll marry you." The world didn't stop there. Soon after, I introduced Declan to my father, and he took to Declan immediately, appreciating his straightforward manner and obvious affection for me. "He's a good man, Alara," Dad said, giving his approval, which meant the world to me. So we got married. It was a modest wedding, nothing too extravagant, but it was perfect for us. I even found myself loving the way I looked in my wedding dress, something I'd never imagined. Smiling wide, I posted photos on my social media, sharing my joy with friends and family. After the wedding, life didn't slow down, it picked up pace. Declan and I barely had time to savor our newlywed bliss before he suggested something big. "Hey Alara, I've been thinking," he said one evening as we unpacked another box of wedding gifts in our cramped apartment. "How about we move in with my folks?" I paused, a coffee mug in hand. "Live with your parents?" He nodded, looking serious. "Yeah, they're not getting any younger, and I'd feel better if we were around to help out. Plus, it would save us some money on rent." It made sense, I guess, but moving in with the in-laws? That was sitcom territory. "Are you sure they'd want us there all the time?" "Absolutely," he assured me. "Mom's been hinting about it ever since we got engaged. Come on, it'll be good." So 2 weeks later, there we were, pulling up to his parents' house with our lives packed into a bunch of boxes. Declan's mom, Serena, was waving from the porch before we even got out of the car. "Oh Alara, we're so thrilled to have you both here," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was a bit too tight. "Welcome home, son, and you too, Alara," Cyrus, Declan's dad, said, clapping him on the back. The house was cozy, stuffed with furniture that looked like it belonged in a 1970s museum. I tried to keep a smile on my face, but I was already missing our little apartment. Declan sensed my hesitation. "It's going to be great, you'll see," he whispered as we carried boxes inside. The first few days were an adjustment. Serena was constantly hovering, always popping into our room to ask if we needed anything. "Just making sure you're comfortable," she chirped, while I tried not to cringe at the invasion of privacy. One evening, we all sat down for dinner, Declan, me, Cyrus, and Serena. The conversation was painfully mundane until Declan dropped another bomb. "So, the house needs some major repairs," he announced casually between bites of meatloaf. "Repairs?" I asked, surprised. "Yeah, the roof's a mess, and the plumbing's from the dark ages," he said. Cyrus nodded solemnly. "We were thinking," Declan continued, avoiding my gaze, "that maybe we could all chip in for the costs." I glanced at Serena, who suddenly seemed very interested in her plate. "All of us?" I asked cautiously. "I just got this pay cut at work," Declan muttered, "so I'm a bit strapped at the moment." There it was. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "I'll see what I can do," I managed to say, even though I wanted to say much more. Serena perked up, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh Alara, that would be so helpful. You're such an angel." The next few weeks were a blur of contractors and repairs. I wrote checks and smiled through gritted teeth as Serena gushed about how wonderful the house was looking. Cyrus slapped me on the back. "You're really part of the family now, Alara," he said. "Part of the family?" "Sure, the part that pays for everything." One particularly grueling day, after yet another round of expensive decisions, I collapsed on our bed, exhausted. Declan came in and sat beside me. "Thanks for handling all this, Alara," he said, sounding almost sincere. "It's fine," I lied, staring at the ceiling. "Just didn't realize how much it would be." He squeezed my hand. "It'll all be worth it. This is for our future, right?" "Our future," I echoed, not quite sure whose future we were building anymore. As I lay there listening to steady breathing, I couldn't help but wonder if moving in was the right decision. But there was no going back now. I was in this deep, and I had to see it through, whatever the cost. After the renovations, the house looked great, like something out of a magazine. Honestly, despite the financial strain, I felt a bit of pride looking around. We decided to throw a small dinner party to celebrate, just the four of us. That's when everything took an unexpected turn. We were in the middle of dinner, laughing and sharing stories when Serena suddenly got quiet. The room felt heavy all of a sudden. She looked at Cyrus, then at us, and her eyes were teary. "We need to tell you both something important," she said, her voice shaky. Declan and I exchanged looks. "What's going on?" I asked, my stomach tightening. Cyrus took a deep breath. "The house, it's heavily mortgaged. We owe $200,000, and the bank could take it away." The clatter of my fork echoed against the plate. "What do you mean?" "All the repairs we just paid for." Serena started sobbing. "We were ashamed and we thought we could manage it, but after the repairs and everything, there's just no way." I felt like I was in a bad dream. All the money, all the effort, it was for a house that wasn't even secure. So, what are you saying now? My voice was sharper than I intended. Well, Declan started, his eyes avoiding mine. I was hoping maybe, Alara, you could talk to your father. Are you serious? I snapped, my voice rising. Ask my dad for $200,000. It's just after his help, the house would be secure for us for a future, Declan pleaded. Serena's sobbing grew louder, making me feel like the villain in this crazy drama. Please, Alara, it's our home. We've spent decades in this house, Declan's pleading wore me down. I'll think about it, I finally muttered, feeling trapped. The next day, I called my dad hesitantly, explaining the situation. To my surprise, he agreed to help, but on one condition. I'll give the money, Alara, but only with a formal agreement, a receipt. I want everything documented. When I relayed this to Declan, he wasn't happy. Why does it have to be so formal? Can't he just trust us? It's $200,000, Declan. It's a lot of money, and he's just being cautious, I argued, feeling the divide between us grow. He'll get his paperwork, Declan muttered, clearly annoyed. The paperwork was drawn up and the money was transferred. Serena and Cyrus were relieved, constantly thanking me. But the air between Declan and me had changed. There was a coldness that wasn't there before. Just when I thought my life couldn't get any darker, tragedy struck with brutal suddenness. Alara, it's your mom, Talia's voice came through the line, shaky and choked. Your dad, he had a heart attack. It's bad. My heart dropped to my stomach. What? How is he? He didn't make it, honey. I'm so sorry, she continued. No, that can't be right, I mumbled, numb. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I hung up and turned to find Declan standing in the doorway. What's wrong? He asked, his voice low. My dad, he's gone, I managed to say before everything inside me broke and I started sobbing. Declan came over and put his arm around me, but it felt like being hugged by a stranger. I'm sorry, Alara, he said, and it sounded sincere, but I was too lost in my grief to really hear him. Exhausted from another long day of funeral planning and negotiations with the agency, I came home earlier than usual. I expected the house to be quiet, but as I inserted my key into the front door, I heard voices from the living room. It was Declan, his tone dripping with frustration and disgust, talking to his parents. I can't do this anymore. Living with her is driving me nuts. It's too much, Declan complained. His mom, usually so sweet and understanding, replied in a stern whisper, you have to hold on a bit longer, Declan. We need to figure out what to do with those receipts your father-in-law had. Alara has them now. The sooner I get out, the better. I'll grab those receipts and destroy them, and then I'll start all over again with that rich beauty I told you about. Declan's voice was cold, calculated. I felt a chill run down my spine. Here I was mourning my father while the people I lived with were plotting behind my back. They were the loving family I thought I married into. Instead, they saw me as nothing more than a means to an end, a way to secure their financial troubles. Rage mixed with shock, but I knew I had to keep my cool. I slammed the door loudly as if I had just come in, disrupting their scheming. Oh, Alara, you're back early. How did everything go with the funeral plans? Serena's voice shifted instantly to one of concern, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I forced a smile, my stomach turning. It's all coming together. Thanks for asking. As I spoke, I could see the quick glances they shot each other, their faces a mask of fake concern. It made my skin crawl, knowing their true colors. But I realized that showing my cards now wouldn't help. I needed to be smart. I needed to protect what was mine and possibly even get some justice for their deceit. The funeral was somber, the air heavy with grief and murmured condolences. But as the ceremony wrapped up and we returned to Declan's parents' house, the true colors of the family I married into began to show. As we gathered in the living room, sipping on lukewarm coffee, Declan's demeanor shifted. His usually charming facade crumbled away, revealing something more. With a cold laugh, he looked straight at me and dropped the bomb. Alara, pack your things. You need to get out. I've got someone else now. Someone better. His words should have been like a slap. I pretended to be stunned, but before I could respond, Serena chimed in with a snide giggle. We've really had enough of you, dear. We only put up with you for your money. What about the house? I asked, feigning innocence. The house that I paid to fix? The $200,000 I poured into it. Serena laughed harder as her true nature emerged. If I told the best joke of the year, oh sweetie, this house is ours. You're nothing here, Declan's smirk widened. And those receipts you're so proud of? Found them in your dad's house and burnt them. They're gone. For a moment, I let them believe they had won. But then I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter. My reaction confused them, their smiles faltering. Why are you laughing? What's so funny? Declan demanded. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. You three are just pathetic. You think you're so clever. The receipts you destroyed? They were copies. The real ones are safe with my lawyer, I revealed. The color drained from both their faces. Declan's arrogance turned to panic. You can't prove anything, he stammered. I can and I will, I shot back, my voice steady and firm. Now, I want my money back, all of it, or my next call is to the police. Declan and Cyrus looked at each other, their earlier confidence replaced by fear. Cyrus, usually so bold and brash, began to plead. Alara, please, let's talk about this. We can sort something out. With the truth out in the open and the leverage squarely in my hands. The negotiations with Declan and his parents dragged on longer than I expected. It was clear they were trying every angle to sway the terms in their favor, but I wasn't about to budge. Look, it's simple, I stated firmly during one of our numerous discussions at their now legally my kitchen table. The house gets transferred to my name in exchange for the divorce. That's the deal. No more games. Finally, they relented. We all agreed that the best course of action was to make everything official and legal. I insisted that everything be documented by a lawyer and confirmed with the proper papers. I want no corners cut, I emphasized. At the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense as documents were signed and notarized. I watched closely as each signature was applied, ensuring there was no room for further deceit. Once everything was finalized, I collected the documents related to the transfer and turned to Declan's mother, who looked deflated yet somehow still carried a hint of her former hostess. I'll be keeping these in a safe place, I said, holding up the papers before slipping them into a folder, just to ensure no one is tempted to pull any stunts. With the legalities handled, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Declan was quiet, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be seen. When the final papers were signed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a chapter closed. On the day they moved out, I stood on the porch of my now fully owned house and watched Declan, his mom, and dad carry their belongings to a rental van. Their movements were slow, the mood somber. I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't how I imagined my marriage ending, but under the circumstances, it was the best possible outcome. After everything settled down and I began to enjoy my newfound peace, word got back to me through friends about Declan and his predicament. Apparently, the grass wasn't greener on the other side. His mistress had dumped him not long after our divorce, and his parents were now crammed into a tiny apartment, a stark downgrade from the comfortable house. They once had it all, but it seemed karma had caught up with them quicker than I expected. Despite their situation, they started reaching out to me, bombarding me with calls and messages, probably hoping to weasel their way back into my life or at least my house. But I was done with their deceit. I blocked their numbers without a second thought and blacklisted them on all social media. It was liberating, cutting the final threads that connected us. One afternoon, as I was enjoying a quiet moment with a book in my living room, a knock came at my door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Declan standing there, a pathetic figure holding a bouquet of flowers. The audacity of it made me scoff. Opening the door, I couldn't help but laugh outright at the sight of him. Really, Declan? Flowers. He shuffled uncomfortably, the bouquet seeming to wilt along with his spirits. Alara, I've realized so many things. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. Remember when you told me I disgusted you? I interrupted, leaning against the door frame, not bothering to hide my amusement at his discomfort. What changed, Declan? Run out of options. He looked down, the shame clear on his face. I made mistakes, but I'm here to make things right. I shook my head, almost feeling sorry for him. Almost. You're not here to make things right, Declan. You're just desperate to get back to your comfortable life. But guess what? That life doesn't exist anymore. Not for you. His face fell and he took a step back as if my words were physical blows. Alara, please. Save it, I cut him off sharply. I want you to leave. Don't come back here. We're done forever. Declan stood there for a second longer, his hope visibly crumbling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Returning to my book, I smiled to myself. The quiet of the house wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, a stark contrast to the chaos that once reigned here. I was finally at peace, living life on my terms, and no bouquet of flowers or sweet talk could disrupt that. I was truly finally free. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. We'll see you on the Retaliation Realm channel.
Welcome to the Retaliation Realm channel. We hope you enjoy today's story. The key turned in the lock with a satisfying click, but the sound that greeted me inside our newly built home was anything but welcoming. In the middle of our living room stood Julian, my husband of 3 years, his arms folded and a smirk playing on his lips. This house is mine, Serafina. I'm going to live here with my parents. If you don't like it, you can leave, he said, his voice cold and devoid of the warmth I once knew. For a moment, I stood frozen, the words ricocheting in my mind. What are you talking about, Julian? My voice barely rose above a whisper, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. He thrust a business card into my hand. A divorce attorney. I thought you might need this, he said, his smugness sending waves of nausea through me. The room spun, and I clutched at the marble countertop for support. Why are you doing this? I managed to ask, my voice trembling. Julian shrugged, his indifference slicing through my heart. You never really fit in with us, Serafina. It's better this way. I remembered the countless times I had tried to blend in with his family, to be a part of his world, the way his mother would scrutinize my every move, the snide remarks, the way his father would ignore me. It was all a game to them, and I was the unwitting pawn. You said we were a team, I accused, my voice gaining strength. Julian laughed, a hollow sound that echoed off the walls. We were until I didn't need you anymore. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had been a means to an end, a stepping stone for him to achieve his dream home. All the love, the sacrifices, the dreams we shared, they meant nothing to him. I felt a rage building inside me, a fire that consumed the hurt and shock. You won't get away with this, I vowed, my eyes locked on Julian. Julian's smirk faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. What can you possibly do, Serafina? He challenged. You'll see, I said, my voice steady now. Karma has a way of coming back around. I turned and walked out of the house, the card crumpled in my fist. Stepping into the sunlight, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I was free from his manipulative grasp, and I was going to make sure he regretted every hurtful word and every deceitful action. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for certain: Julian was going to pay for what he had done, and I was going to be the one to collect. The coffee shop was bustling with activity, but I sat in a quiet corner, a cup of untouched latte growing cold in front of me. Memories flooded back, each one a sharp jab to my heart. 3 years ago, I met Julian at a mutual friend's party. He was charming, a bit awkward, and seemingly genuine. We clicked over our shared love for classic rock and Italian cuisine. I remember thinking, here's a man who understands the value of family and simplicity. But as our relationship progressed, so did the unveiling of his true colors. Living together brought the real Julian into the light, the man who would leave his dirty laundry scattered across our bedroom for days, who shrugged off basic hygiene with alarming nonchalance. "Serafina, why make such a fuss? It's just clothes," he would say, brushing off my concerns. His habits grated on me, but it was his dismissive attitude that hurt the most. He never valued my comfort, always prioritizing his convenience over our harmony. Every time I tried to address it, he deflected, saying, "My mom never complained about doing these things for me." Visits to Julian's parents' house were a revelation. His father, a mirror image of Julian, disregarded others' boundaries, casually intruding into spaces without a thought. "What's the big deal?" he'd chuckle when I expressed my discomfort. His mother, a seemingly gentle soul, always rushed to clean up after the men, reinforcing their behavior in that household. Julian's habits weren't flaws, they were norms. I clung to the hope that love would smooth out these rough edges. But as time passed, my hope turned to disillusionment. The man I fell in love with was a facade, and beneath it was someone who cared for nothing but his desires. The stark contrast between the Julian I knew and the one I lived with was jarring. I felt deceived, trapped in a relationship that was more a convenience for him than a partnership. "You're always making a big deal out of nothing, Serafina," Julian would say during our arguments, his words laced with disdain. And now, his ultimate betrayal, the house that was meant to be our dream, our future, was just another chess piece in his selfish game. A fire ignited within me, fueled by every belittling comment, and every dismissive gesture. Julian had shown his true colors, and it was time for me to show mine. He thought he could discard me like one of his dirty shirts, but I wasn't going to be tossed aside so easily. I was determined to fight back, not just for myself, but for every moment I spent believing in a lie. Standing up, I left the cold latte behind. It was time to plot my next move, to turn the tables on Julian. He thought he had won, but the game had just begun. Outside the small but cozy space that was now my nail salon, the sign above the door read, "Serafina's Elegance," a name that symbolized a fresh start. This was more than a business, it was a declaration of my newfound independence. The early days were tough. I worked tirelessly, my hands often aching from the meticulous artistry my job demanded. But with each stroke of polish, each satisfied customer, I rebuilt the confidence Julian had tried to shatter. "Your work is incredible, Serafina," one of my regulars, Mrs. Thompson, said one day. "You've got a real gift." Her words were a balm to my weary soul. I had started from scratch with nothing but my skills and determination. Julian thought he had left me with nothing, but he was wrong. He had underestimated my resilience. As my business grew, so did my resolve. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to thrive. And part of that meant ensuring Julian got what he deserved. One evening, as I balanced my books, I smiled at the numbers. My salon was not just surviving, it was prospering. I was nearing my goal of financial independence, a stark contrast to the life Julian must be leading. I remembered his arrogance, his smug face as he handed me the divorce attorney's card. He thought he had secured his future with that house. Little did he know, the financial noose was tightening around his neck. I had heard through mutual friends that Julian was struggling. The mortgage payments were higher than he anticipated, and his parents, far from the financial safety net he expected, were an additional burden. A plan began to form in my mind. Julian had always been terrible with money, relying on others to bail him out. But this time, there would be no rescue. As I polished the nails of my next client, a mischievous smile played on my lips. "Everything all right, Serafina?" the client asked. "Better than all right," I replied. "I'm just enjoying the thought of karma in action." In my mind, I pictured Julian floundering under the weight of his decisions, his dreams crumbling like the walls of the house he had stolen from me. But this was just the beginning. I wasn't going to sit back and watch. I was going to be the architect of his downfall, and every step of his descent would be a step up for me. He had built his house on lies and deceit. It was only a matter of time before it all came tumbling down, and I, Serafina, would be there to witness it, my hands clean, my conscience clear. The ringing of my phone broke the silence of the evening. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Julian. A sense of satisfaction washed over me. This was the moment I had been preparing for. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice calm and composed. "Serafina, you need to help me," he blurted out, his voice laced with panic. "Why would I help you?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "It's the house, Serafina. I can't afford the mortgage, and the bank is threatening foreclosure." I almost laughed at the irony. Julian, who had once flaunted his control and financial stability, was now at the mercy of his own poor decisions. "You were always so confident in your finances, Julian. What happened?" I prodded, unable to resist the urge to twist the knife a little deeper. "I underestimated the costs, and my parents, they're draining me. I can't keep up with everything," Julian pleaded. I could picture him now, the once arrogant man crumbling under the weight of reality. "That sounds like a tough situation," I replied, my voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "Serafina, please. You were always the one who managed our finances better. I need you. I need your help." His plea was pathetic, and it filled me with a sense of power. This was the man who had thought he could discard me like yesterday's news. Now he was begging for my help. "Julian, you made your choice," I said firmly. "You chose that house over our marriage. You chose your comfort over our partnership. Why should I bail you out now?" There was a pause on the line, and I could almost hear the cogs turning in his head, trying to come up with a convincing argument. "I'll do anything, Serafina. Please, I'm begging you." The word begging resonated in the air, a sweet vindication of all the hurt and betrayal he had caused me. "I'm sorry, Julian. You're on your own this time. Maybe it's time you learn to clean up your mess," I said, a smirk forming on my lips. I hung up the phone before he could respond. A wave of exhilaration rushed through me. Julian was finally getting a taste of the consequences of his actions, and I had front-row seats to the show. As I sat there, basking in the glow of my small victory, I knew this was only the beginning. Julian's downfall was inevitable, and I was going to make sure he felt every bit of the pain he had inflicted on me. His house of cards was falling, and I wasn't going to lift a finger to stop it. After all, karma has a way of coming back around, and for Julian, it was only just beginning. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the thriving salon, now buzzing with activity as I was preparing for my first client of the day when a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Julian, looking disheveled and desperate, a stark contrast to the confident man he once was. "Serafina, we need to talk," he said, his voice lacking the arrogance I remembered. "This isn't a good time, Julian." "I have clients," I replied, not bothering to hide my indifference. "It's about the house. I'm losing it, Serafina. I've got nowhere to go. The bank is taking everything," he pleaded. I paused, taking in the sight of him. This was the man who thought he could cast me aside, who believed he could control everything and everyone around him. Now, he was crumbling before my eyes. "Julian, you made your bed. Now you have to lie in it," I said, my words deliberate and cold. "But I thought you might come to your rescue after everything you've done," he stammered, desperation clear in his eyes. I cut him off, the satisfaction of seeing him like this indescribable. "Serafina, please. I was wrong. I see that now. I need you." I looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man I had once loved, the man I had built dreams with, and he had betrayed me without a second thought. No, Julian, you don't need me. You need to take responsibility for your actions. You need to face the consequences of your choices, I said firmly. I could see the realization dawning on him, the understanding that there was no way out, that he had reached the end of the road. I'm sorry, Serafina. Truly, I am. His apology was too little, too late. I had moved on, built a life that was mine and mine alone, a life where he had no place. Goodbye, Julian. I wish you the best, but this is where our paths diverge for good, I declared. He stood there for a moment, looking lost and broken. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. As the door closed behind him, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had faced my past, and I had come out stronger. Julian's downfall was his own doing, and I had played my part in it. But it was time to let go, to focus on the future. I turned back to my clients, a smile on my face. I was Serafina, owner of a successful salon, a woman who had overcome betrayal and emerged victorious. My past with Julian was just that, the past. My future was bright, and it was all mine. The salon was closed for the day, and I sat alone, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The walls, once bare, now adorned with accolades and tokens of appreciation from clients, were a testament to my hard work and resilience. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I hesitated, then stood to answer it. To my surprise, it was Mrs. Gardner, Julian's mother. Serafina, may I come in? Her voice was timid, a stark contrast to the domineering woman I remembered. I nodded, curiosity piqued. Of course, Mrs. Gardner. What brings you here? She took a seat, her hands wringing in her lap. I wanted to apologize, Serafina, for everything. Her words took me aback. This woman had sided with Julian, who had criticized me for not conforming to their way of life. Why now? I asked, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. She sighed, a look of defeat in her eyes. Since you left, everything has fallen apart. Julian lost the house, and we're struggling to make ends meet. I see now how wrong we were, how we treated you. There was a part of me that wanted to relish in her misery, to savor the taste of vindication. But looking at her, a broken woman, I realized that my victory lay not in their downfall but in my rise. Mrs. Gardner, I've moved on, gone from that part of my life. What happened with Julian was unfortunate, but it led me to where I am today, I replied. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. You didn't deserve any of it. I offered her a small smile. Thank you for saying that. I hope things get better for you and your family. As she left, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The chapter of my life that included Julian and his family was officially closed. I turned to gaze at my salon, my sanctuary. It was more than a business, it was a symbol of my strength, my independence, and my ability to overcome adversity. I had not only survived Julian's betrayal, I had thrived. And in doing so, I had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that the best revenge is living well. And living well was exactly what I intended to do. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.